It was deep night outside and only the light in the rooms illuminated everything around. In shaking hands was a phone containing the same message. The target was discovered. These messages only frightened the girl more, who was already scared by what was happening. But after a while, the door to her room was opened and the very target that had been spoken of appeared. His eyes showed either hatred or obsession with the lady, since the level of his feelings for her was still unknown. After such a not-so-best start, new messages arrived on the phone. It was a special world created especially for her. It was worth raising the level of feelings of the targets in order to progress the story and achieve a special ending. If she reaches the special ending within 3 years, she will win, her memories will return, and the lady will be returned to her original world. The target's sense level can reach a maximum of 5. Exceeding this limit will cause the object to enter a state of overheating. In this state, the chances of getting the extreme ending are significantly increased. When during the wedding with one of the targets, it will be possible to kill him with a weapon. But when you get the extreme ending, the game will restart again and return to the very beginning. The game has begun, and small changes have taken place in the always quiet estate of Countess Huxley. They began when Ariel Huxley, the withdrawn daughter of a countess who spent most of her life locked in her room. She replaced her worn-out dress with a new one, impeccably white like snow or white roses. She also began to stroll through the garden once or twice a day, greeting and having long conversations with the mansion's staff. It was a very small change, but very surprising for the girl, although she still spent most of her time in her room. Compared to the previous week, it was a significant change, as if night had turned to day. In addition, yesterday she had a short piano lesson. The lady formally learned to play the instrument for the first time, which was quite interesting. It would be nice if the girl learned to play 1 or 2 instruments. Perhaps it would be worth hiring a teacher. But Ariel didn't need that. She thought she had a talent for it, and serious training would only be burdensome. The atmosphere in the mansion was always like that of a funeral. The Countess began to behave coldly, and her voice could only be heard on special occasions. This, coupled with her daughter's monotonous and quiet life, created such a gloomy atmosphere, and for this reason the Countess's servants fervently hoped for further changes. And today, His Highness the Prince, who planned to stay until dinner, will visit their estate. Visiting nearby noble families is part of his routine to monitor the political situation. If she simply greeted him properly, then Ariel would no longer have to deal with him. He would still come to talk to his mother. But the prince was her age, so most likely she would be able to meet him at the academy. It wouldn't hurt for a lady to attract his attention in advance, so she was sure to greet His Highness with due politeness. Taking advantage of this opportunity to establish good relationships, he'll be with them for about 3 or 4 hours, so it's best to start preparing now. And if the girl needs something for this, then let her know about it. By this time, the Countess's daughter was standing outside her room, where the maids had led her. She didn't want to see His Highness the Prince at all. She only just started talking to at least the staff. But what scared the girl most was something completely different, because that prince was most likely one of the targets. Now I had to somehow think through my next steps. Nothing sensible came to mind except to open the window. It still contained the text that the plot was locked, and detailed information and access to progress would become open after meeting at least one target. For some unknown reason, she woke up here a week ago. Now the lady lives the life of the daughter of Countess Huxley. Luckily, she remembered everything about the setting and the society itself, but the problem was that she couldn't remember who she really was or even where she lived. And yet she only saw the screen if she brought the device, which was not from this world, close to her. It reminded her that she wasn't Ariel Huxley, but no matter how many times she tried to find out more information, the phone only showed the same message. It was as if he couldn't give her more than she already knew, but even though the screen wasn't visible to others, the phone itself stood out too much. But it wasn't worth forgetting about preparation. One of the maids volunteered to help. Cannon was the first person she encountered after becoming Ariel Huxley. On the days when she was unwell, she took care of her with a worried expression on her face. The girl didn't know what was going on, but the maid kindly taught her everything she needed to know. She probably thought that the real Ariel Huxley, if it weren't for her, the lady wouldn't have been able to prepare properly. But even if Cannon weren't here, the girl would still shine with her beauty. It was pleasant to hear these words from her, which even calmed me down from the thoughts that were troubling me. This did not last long, because the meeting with His Majesty the Prince was getting closer and closer. After a while, it started raining outside. The atmosphere in the mansion was not the best to begin with, but now it was even worse. At this moment, a black carriage arrived, from which the long-awaited guests emerged with umbrellas. The Countess's daughter stood silently and waited, because she knew what she had to do if she met the goal. She would successfully achieve the special ending in 3 years. In this case, she will be able to regain her lost memories and return to her real world. But the girl had no idea what these goals and special endings were that needed to be achieved. Is it true that meeting this man will help her regain her memory, or is it all a lie? The lady stood silently under the umbrella until she heard the prince asking about the Countess's child. Her child spent all her time in her room, so almost no one knows about her daughter. Now His Majesty the Prince knew that the Countess had, after all, had a daughter all this time. This girl wasn't some kind of servant, so why didn't she raise her head? She didn't expect at all that a man would approach her, and with such words. He was much taller than her and looked down on her, showing his status. But it was surprising for him to meet the Countess's daughter, whom no one knew about. The lady met her first target, which she had not yet realized. At that moment, the phone in her room vibrated. The plot was unlocked, and now she could play freely. The incident that day was like a bolt from the blue. It was such a shocking experience that it was imprinted in my memory in every detail. She was experiencing a chaos of feelings of confusion and shame. The road was bathed in bright sunlight. The reflection of the city sparkled on the walls of the building. A brief moment when she spoke politely to someone. Something precious was right in front of her, but the girl was unable to grab and hold it. It felt like her chest was being torn apart at that moment. But she couldn't dwell on the past for long now. His Highness the Prince stood before her. The lady greeted him politely, introducing herself as the eldest daughter of the Huxley family, Ariel Huxley. This was not the best start to the conversation, and everyone who heard it understood that everything was too bad. Therefore, the Countess herself approached them and asked the lady to wait until she finished her conversation with His Highness. The girl obediently obeyed, waiting for His Highness to be taken inside. All this time, the man looked at the lady until he was called inside for further conversation. Ariel and the maid who stood next to her watched the departing silhouettes. He didn't seem like a polite person, and it seemed like it would be difficult to maintain a conversation with him. But what does he think of her? At least the lady did not leave a bad impression. After His Highness and the Countess retired to talk, the girl followed their example and went into the room. Her head was full of thoughts about what would happen next. She didn't want to continue the dialogue with him. While she was thinking about everything that had happened, one of the maids came into her room. She came to inform him that the Countess was waiting with His Majesty downstairs in the banquet hall. But before the girl left, she wanted to tell her something important. It was a black box, namely, a welcome gift that she was supposed to give to the prince. The Countess asked the maid to convey this to her in case she was left alone with him. Inside this strange black box was a square-cut sapphire. The words she said during tea were not just polite phrases. But there was nothing left to do but go with the maid to the banquet hall. There was already a luxuriously set table in the room, at which the ladies were already waiting. As soon as Ariel entered the room, everyone present immediately turned their attention to her. Having offered to sit down, she obediently approached the table, choosing a place for herself next to her mother. As soon as the girl approached her seat, she carefully pushed back her chair and sat down. After this, it was possible to continue the conversation, which the lady did not listen to at all, thinking about her own. She had to take the device while she was waiting. It was unexpected for her that she completely forgot about it. Because of her status, she could not approach him freely, and his nature seemed rather harsh. How can she give the gift in such conditions, when there are so many people around and a huge table between them? Besides, the weather was quite bad, so the Countess suggested that we spend the night with them. But in fact, His Highness was not bothered by the ride in the rain, but he would stay, as she suggested. The atmosphere was becoming tense, and the woman decided to lighten it by asking if he liked the food. Everything was fine. The man didn't complain, but he sat there with an arrogant expression on his face. The man looked straight at the Countess's daughter, who did not like his gaze at all. But that was not all. The prince had some plan in mind that would soon be brought to fruition. Not even a couple of minutes had passed before he ordered in a commanding tone to leave the princess alone and for everyone else to get lost. The Countess was amazed and wanted to know the reason, but was refused. After all, His Highness wanted them to leave now without any unnecessary questions. In the meantime, they can wait somewhere until he gives them further instructions. There was no way to refuse the prince, so I had to submit to his will and leave. He watched the whole time as everyone left the room until they were left alone. Now the situation couldn't be worse because knowing how bad the guy's character was, everything would be terrible. Don't look back and don't make noise. Look down and eat in silence. All this was about the girl. This made the prince wonder where she learned to behave like a doll when guests came. But the lady has not studied anywhere. She simply observes good manners of respect for His Highness. Usually Ariel is more free and uninhibited, although the Countess said that they are the same age. And also that she plans to enter the academy this year, which was exactly the case. The woman said that she must enroll this year and she was determined to do so. The Countess also asked how the prince would feel if she became her princess consort. The only question that remains is whether Ariel Huxley is interested in playing the princess consort. She didn't know about this question, so it's difficult for the girl to answer, so she needs time to think. But what was Mother thinking about? She was not one to force such things. At this moment, the prince noticed that the lady had something hidden, asking why she did not present it. Since he noticed this, should she just hand over the gift? After all, it would be easier to give it now. Or is it better for the girl to pretend that she didn't understand anything? The choice was difficult. Still, the lady decided to tell him that it was a gift for His Highness. The Countess prepared everything so well, or perhaps it was just out of politeness. Or maybe it was her personal interest, although it was still too early for that. The situation was getting worse. She must answer carefully. If she does something wrong, she may fall into his disfavor. It was a gesture from the county. The lady had not yet made her debut in high society, and she is afraid of getting into a conflict as soon as she starts studying at the academy. Her whole body was shaking as she said these words. But that is precisely why she tried to earn his favor, to protect her position. After all, a girl needs connections, which was exactly the case. But the prince understood that the Countess, of course, was not chasing the position of princess consort. But then why all this? Although her mother tried to help her, fortunately, it is not difficult for the guy to give a helping hand. But he doesn't understand why he should do this. Even though he takes into account the Countess's good connections, this is not enough. In any case, His Highness had already decided to stay here for the night. His smile did not bode well. Although if the girl manages to make a good impression on him, he will take this into account. After the conversation, they moved to another room, where Ariel presented the prepared gift. As soon as the man opened the black box, a bright blue stone sparkled inside. But the prince was only testing people, evaluating and measuring them, as if they were all just toys in his hands. And if someone doesn't live up to his standards, he will become the devil incarnate to them. The process can be so brutal that it destroys human pride. After which His Highness threw the stone he had just given into the bushes, where it was still raining. The weather outside was so terrible that over time, the ordinary rain turned into a thunderstorm. But now Huxley had no time for this. She was sitting in the rain in the bushes and trying to find the stone. She tried to look in every place because he could be anywhere, but where should she look for him? As the lady remained outside, her clothes became increasingly wet, making her increasingly cold. It was too much, making Ariel wonder if he was really the target. Maybe it wasn't him at all. After all, while she was suffering on the street, he looked at her from the balcony with an arrogant face. However, it would be useful to attract his attention, because the prince has enormous connections. She can't remember anything about herself, her home, her family, or even her names. Everything was as if in a fog. There was another reason why she wanted to come back, but it too disappeared, as if someone had erased all her memories. She should stop worrying about it and just concentrate on what's in front of her right now. But this work was not easy, because the stone was small and the bushes were growing. Enough time has passed. How long is she going to search? His Highness could not understand whether she had such a strong will or was simply stubborn. It was time for the girl to give in and run to him in tears. The guy would laugh while she cried. After which he will give her what she wants, what Skylar set up as a test. This is his way of showing her that you have to try your best to satisfy it and get what you want, a game that rewards properly. But at the same time, he erases memories of himself, no matter how attractive the Count's daughter is. He was sure that he would soon get bored and lose interest as usual, but today Skylar feels a little strange. A Count's daughter he had never heard of, with an appearance that would have attracted everyone's attention if she had been in high society. He didn't even have time to properly examine her face, but the way she grimly obeyed his orders paralyzed the prince so that he could not move from the spot. Apparently, the girl didn't know about the concept of contractual relationships, or did it simply to earn his trust. His Highness thought she was simply pretending not to know about high society. Did the Countess take her request seriously, since her behavior now seems strange? However, she has nothing to do with him and can only watch from the side. At this moment, the door was heard opening, which prevented the prince from hurrying to come to her. It was the same prank as usual, so why was this girl acting so persistently? After all, it was she who entered the house. The lady was soaking wet, but she found the precious stone. Now this seemingly trinket for the prince was now in Huxley's hands, all wet. But she was worried whether His Highness was now pleased that she had been able to find this stone. Because the lady had been hanging around on the street searching for too long, she had become very ill. Because of this, she could no longer stand on her feet. Her strength was leaving her too quickly. And so, Skylar felt that something strange had happened to him, something that had not happened before. For some reason, the guy was now hugging the Countess's daughter, trying to hold her back. He saw how much pain the girl was in now, and he couldn't help but blame himself for it. But he doesn't need to think about it. He doesn't need to understand anymore why she does this. Because in the end, reward was all she wanted from him. Even if that was the case, the boy didn't understand why he thought he had to grab her before someone else did. After all, right now in front of him lay a defenseless girl who was all red and wet from the rain. Quite a bit of time has passed since Ariel fell unconscious. While she was lying on the bed, someone's hand gently touched her hair, brushing against her fingers. And as soon as the lady finally woke up and opened her eyes, the first thing she heard was that she slept like a log. Which was not surprising, since His Highness the Prince had been sitting next to her the whole time. But why was he next to her? Apparently, she wanted to see a ghost. Ider's nature couldn't be changed, but for some reason he looked at her differently now. He waited for her to wake up so he could take her with him, and since that had already happened, it was time to get ready and go. More and more questions arose about where he wanted to take her, but the Countess could give the answer. With these words, the man left the girl's room, leaving her alone with her thoughts. But now the puzzle in my head was completely assembled. This man was definitely the target. And to check it out, the lady finally took out her device and everything was confirmed. The window contained all the information about Skylar, even his age and preference. Everything was written out in great detail, and now she finally received a reward for her hard work. At least it could talk to him, but the window also allowed one to start tracking the target. Clicking on the track revealed that Eder was in the main building of the Huxley residence, in a second-floor corridor. This function looked very familiar to the girl. Her hands remembered everything. Just a quick glance already gave an understanding of how to use it. Perhaps these things were commonplace in the world she came from, since she immediately understood what was going on. As soon as she finished, a maid knocked on her door and asked her to come in. Having let her in, she immediately asked about the lady's well-being. Fortunately, everything was fine. This could not but please, because the powers of the imperial family are definitely on a different level. As it turned out, His Highness was taking care of Ariel while she was unconscious. The maid is not sure since she is only a commoner, but she thinks that he used magic. So there was magic in this world after all, it wasn't just the usual Middle Ages. But what happened while she was unconscious and what is that bag in her hands? She didn't know the details, but the Countess and His Highness talked about her moving to the academy. It seems the woman is going to send the lady as soon as there is a recommendation from His Highness. The admission period to the academy was April. But she must notify the academy as early as possible. Since she is entering on the prince's recommendation, she will become a student through him, but they must not neglect preparation. With His Highness's recommendation, Huxley knew she would be admitted to the academy, but why so suddenly? Skylar agreed to issue a letter of recommendation for the academy. Since the verification of documents will take time, it is better to start right now. It was just a simple translation procedure, so she could walk alone without any problems. And now they were riding straight to the academy in the black carriage in which the prince had arrived to see them. Now the man was sitting next to her and seemed to be sleeping, albeit in a strange position. The Countess said everything would be fine, but she never mentioned the ride in His Highness's carriage. Should the girl now thank him for helping her recover? The thought of this was a little disconcerting, because perhaps it was worth doing right now. Although he could hate her just because she came close to him, otherwise it would be dangerous. All she learned was a warning, not a plan of action, namely, to take his sensitivity into account. In such a situation, it might have been better not to know, but now it's too late. At this time, a fair-haired man was looking at the carriage that was quickly approaching. Just as the lady wanted to thank His Highness for his help, he stood up abruptly, which frightened her. But Eider only saw the same man who stood at the door, calling him crazy. At this point, information about the new target was released, which only made things more frightening. Because that meant that this man was also a target, and his name was Rachel de Solem. Ariel couldn't believe her eyes that this man was also a target. But what was this man doing in this place, and in the rain at that? While the lady was thinking about this, the prince told him that he had told him to go as he was supposed to. Although this method was much more convenient, whether it was convenient or not, he should not do it this way. But why not? Nothing will happen to Skylar, so he has to be on the brink of death for Rachel to stop. Every time the man jumps out of the carriage, it shakes so much that the prince feels sick. It's because his defensive spell is too powerful. He should have used something weaker. Finally, when he was scolded, the man noticed that there was someone in the carriage besides the prince. Only after asking what it was did he receive a stern answer that he had nothing to worry about. It was a bit of a surprise for the girl that they stood up for her in this way, but Ariel was still interested in meeting this person, so she decided to say hello first. As it turned out, even if she said hello, Rachel wouldn't answer her. That's just the way he was. It was even sad, because essentially she needed to talk to the targets to learn more about them. But now the lady would like to go somewhere because this atmosphere was too oppressive. Luckily, the journey wasn't too long, as the academy itself was already in sight. After some time, the man finally decided to ask His Highness who she was. By this time, the girl had already fallen asleep, so she could not hear their conversation. It wasn't that he often interacted with girls his age, but why was he so interested? After all, Rachel was the kind of person who wouldn't even say a word to his acquaintances. Are they really going to make her an empress or something? It was the first time the man had seen Skylar so worried, but he didn't seem to treat her like he really cared about her. Whatever their relationship, she will still be taken away in the end. After all, now this girl is caught in the web of His Highness himself, and it is unlikely that she will not get out so easily. The whole situation was very interesting, but all we could do was watch. Although this was just another royal matter that did not concern the man at all. So it was not for him to think about it, these were His Highness's problems. After some time, they finally arrived at their destination. All this time, the lady was sleeping in the carriage. It was only when they stopped that Skylar decided to wake the girl up. It was only when she opened her eyes that she realized she had slept half the way next to the prince. It was awkward because she behaved indecently in front of His Majesty the Prince. Luckily, one of the servants came up and said that everything was ready, thus lightening the atmosphere. After which the doors to the carriage were opened, and Skylar came out first, waiting for the lady. As soon as she took all her things and left, she was immediately met by a servant who offered to show my lady the way. They were at a luxurious castle. Everything around it was shining and looked wonderful. Could it really be that such a luxurious building was the academy? It was impossible to take your eyes off it. It was too beautiful and also too big. Compared to it, Ariel was a bug. Before she could admire such beauty enough, she was called to come over. His Highness called her to hand over the documents necessary for the translation. The girl had to keep them safe because he would need to put a seal on them later. Did he really arrange everything in advance? So much has already been prepared, thanks to Skylar alone. After handing over the envelope, he told the girl standing next to him that Ariel was his guest, so she should treat her properly. She immediately obeyed and, approaching my lady, asked her to take her luggage. Although they were not just maids but courtiers, it was said that they would not lift a finger for those who did not belong to the royal family. In addition, the man will single out the lady's maids or courtiers separately. So now she didn't have to pretend to be unhappy here. She would have everything she needed. Having thanked His Highness, he was momentarily embarrassed by such words, which fortunately was not noticeable. After which the prince ordered the same girl to show the lady around. With these words, he turned around and went his way, because His Majesty still had a lot of things to do. Leaving Ariel completely alone, she watched as Skylar walked further and further away. This girl asked to follow her, because she would take the Countess's daughter to the room where she would be staying. As soon as they entered the castle, the corridor in it was very large and luxurious. Shouldn't they have gone to the academy? That place looked much more important than an educational institution. Why did everything happen so hastily? Was she really going to have to spend the day in some unknown place? After some time, they finally came to the madam's room, in which she would now live. The girl left the key to the room on the table at the entrance, and before she left, the lady decided to ask Madam, where does she want to dine, in the banquet hall, or would she prefer to have dinner brought to her room? But remembering the prince's words, should she address the maids more formally? The fact that Huxley remained silent for so long puzzled the maid, because the question was simple, and after a few minutes, the lady was finally able to utter the words so that they would bring it to her room. It was very awkward, but in that case, if she didn't mind, she would have everything ready by 7 o'clock, that is, in an hour. If the lady had any requests, she could press the bell on the wall, but for now the maid would leave. Ariel was free to move around the palace, but she asked to return to her room by 10 in the evening, after which the maid left, leaving her alone, in which case she could take out her device. Now it was possible to look at information about Raishin. He was the second son of Solam, but besides that, he was the sixth prince's cousin, even though he spoke to her without any formality. But besides this, a new room appeared. Now in the device one could see the imperial hierarchy. There is an absolute hierarchy in the empire that cannot be broken. It was established by the bloodlines of the royal family and the founding family. Considered sacred and revered for centuries, the reason these bloods are placed on a pedestal is not only because of their rarity, but also in the fact that the genetic superiority they exhibit is unmatched, and that the Reblitan Empire managed to conquer many kingdoms. And it established itself as an empire directly related to the power inherited through this blood. Accordingly, the power here is colossal, and the gap between the classes is stark and deep-rooted. Even being a nobleman cannot avoid a certain level of discrimination or contempt. Lesser nobles are not allowed to address members of the imperial blood without due formality. Was this really why the maids were so tense? It seemed they were used to constantly being on edge. How can she approach them now? They are all so high-ranking that it is impossible to have a proper conversation, and whether she will be able to meet with them when she wants. Once logged into the device, location information for 2 or more targets is activated, and combined tracking is now enabled automatically. At that moment, a screen appeared with full information about Skylar and Raishin, who was difficult to track due to the distance. But now the girl knew that the prince was now in the central palace, so the place where she was not an academy at all, but a palace. The maid said that she could move freely until 10 in the evening. It's probably better to try and find Skylar since he's nearby than to sit around doing nothing. Maybe we can invite him to dinner. Although remembering his character, it is unlikely that His Highness will agree to dine with her. But there was still one more option for how to meet the prince. The girl wanted to say that she didn't understand the documents, but even though there were complex words there, she understood everything. She only has 3 years to increase her level of affection. So if she delays, she won't have the opportunity to talk to him alone at all. And yet the lady left the room for a little walk. But what should she say or ask when the transfer would take place? Whether it would work, she doubted whether she should even try to talk to him. While Ariel was wandering through the corridors of the castle thinking about her next plan, she heard someone scream. Walking a little further, in the distance one could see the back of a man with whom they were disappointed. Although he was addressed as His Highness, it was a title higher than Skylar's, which was interesting. There was a girl standing next to him who was yelling at him that she would not apologize, knowing that it was disrespectful. She was shaking all over with fear, realizing what punishment would follow for such behavior. At this moment, the girl had already begun to cry, because His Highness was trying to interrupt her. After these words, a huge smile spread across the man's face. Of course, he thought she was just stupid, but it turned out that the lady couldn't control her emotions, just like a child. These words left the girl in a complete stupor. The whole picture was simply terrible. After all, was she really just a joke for His Majesty? She hoped until the very end that he was lying. But it was all real. By this moment the man had managed to notice Huxley, who was standing to the side. He couldn't show himself in a bad light in front of such a beautiful girl, so he asked the lady not to cry. After all, such behavior was a disgrace. Just like her family, it was impossible to find worse words. Unfortunately, Ariel could not help this lady in any way now, but could only watch from the sidelines, watching this girl shake with fear and cry from all these words. But His Majesty was interested in observing the girl from the side. her behavior. And only then, he decided to show her that he knew about the presence and that she should remain silent. This only made things more frightening, causing the Countess's daughter to cover her mouth to keep from screaming. Without taking his eyes off her, the man continued talking to the girl. She had almost calmed down when he said that he had already been hit twice, which only increased her fear. On His Highness's face there was a mark from a blow, which was apparently left by this girl. It was interesting to watch someone tremble with fear and beg for mercy. But still, the man decided to let her go this time. This was the most unexpected and best development, although suspicious. But she didn't want to make her situation worse, so she left immediately after these words. Ariel was still standing somewhere in the hallway, watching as the man was left alone. Besides, she couldn't help but take a closer look at him because this man looked very similar to Skylar. But the facial expression and character, everything except the appearance, is completely different. And so, finally, he decided to address the girl directly, saying that it was an extremely shameful performance. All this time he was getting closer and closer, walking slowly. As soon as His Highness came close, he could be seen much better. He asked to keep secret everything she managed to see. At that moment, information about the target was unlocked. Of course, he would like to talk to her longer, but now the man feels bad. Therefore, he will not keep the girl here for too long. But finally, before he leaves, His Highness will at least touch the lady's hands a little longer. Suggesting that we talk another time, the whole scene seemed romantic. Although in her soul, after what she saw, fear of this man raged. They stood like that for a very short time, after which the man decided to leave to do his business. Leaving Ariel completely alone, trying to figure out what just happened. Why did he do this? They had just met, and that girl even called the guy His Highness. But now she knew that the guy's name was Devancia von Elios Leblithan. But there was a temporary bug in the attachment to her, which caused the attachment check to be delayed. Of all the people, it was the most senior who did not have complete information. Now 3 people had been unblocked. The question remained who was the last one. It was probably someone connected to the royal family, just like everyone else. While Ariel was thinking about this, Skylar came up behind her. It was unexpected, but he was just curious about what she was doing there. Perhaps she had done something wrong, because the lady looked sad and was still walking around here without dinner. The reason was the weather. It was good. The sun had already set, and she liked the night sky. Although she shouldn't wander too far, it was best to take a short walk and come back. After such good advice, His Highness the Prince decided to retire on his business. But this was the best opportunity to stop him, which the lady took advantage of. She still wanted to invite him to have dinner together. These words shocked Skylar because he certainly did not expect such an offer. The girl offered to go out to eat together, if he hadn't already, from the bottom of her heart. And only after a couple of minutes she realized that she had been holding the prince's hand all this time. Her hand moved forward on its own. The girl was only trying to hold him back. But if it would not be inconvenient for him, the lady would like to dine with him. Ariel's behavior greatly embarrassed the man, especially since he needed to repay the count. So His Highness agreed to dinner, which was very good news. In addition, he asked not to touch him again without permission. It was indeed a mistake, so the lady promised not to do it again. And since they had already finished talking, the man offered to follow him. There was nothing to do but obey and follow him straight. They walked together along long corridors in a direction unknown to the girl. All this time, the guy turned to the lady from time to time, looking at her. She irritated him too much by always making him blush, which she didn't know, but Skylar felt like a puppy next to her. At this time, the guy's level of affection has grown 2 hearts, and now he can start the conversation first. Of course, Huxley didn't know about this because she couldn't get the device out in front of everyone. But judging by the map, the road they were walking along led to the royal family's chambers. It would be better to refrain from any actions that could turn against her. By this time, they had already reached the place where they had been going all this time. The servants who were standing at the entrance to the room opened the door for them, but as soon as they walked a little further, someone called Skylar. It was a man familiar to him and not the most pleasant, namely His Highness, whom she had seen only today. He asked the guy what had happened to him that he had decided to bring a guest here. The man stood with a smug expression on his face, looking straight at the couple. The fact that he appeared here at such a moment could not help but frighten the girl. But Skylar was only angered by his appearance because he said that he was feeling unwell. He really felt unwell in that case. Let him go and rest and not walk around here. The fact that he was here and interfering only made me angrier, although Devancius did not want to leave at all and decided to find out if she was the new princess. And so it was clear that they had agreed with the Count about her move. He should have stopped pretending he didn't know and stopped making empty guesses. Moreover, he has plenty of competent informants, which is exactly what happened. But when the man looks into his eyes, his suspicions arise again. He saw something personal in it, although the prince said that it was not so. In that case, he asked if he could take this girl for himself. At this point, new reports came in that major forks were now appearing that could not be reversed. But now Skylar tried not to explode with anger at Devancia's words. He could do whatever he wanted and continue to behave as he always did, like a man of low birth. The guy's behavior only amused His Highness, because what does his humiliation give him? It could only make things worse for Tom, but there was nothing he couldn't say to his brother. These words only made the prince even more angry, because he couldn't even say anything. Therefore, it was necessary to control oneself, because such behavior only worsened the situation. It would be better for the princess to return to her room now, so as not to see the further conversation. But at that moment, the man had already attracted Ariel's attention by asking her to address him by name. The girl did not expect at all that she would suddenly find herself between two fires, and Ariel could not get away from this because His Highness himself asked if she wanted to be with him. Skylar had just managed to calm down somehow, but upon hearing these words, the anger returned with renewed vigor. The fact that he was in such a state could not help but frighten the Count's daughter. She didn't want things to go on like this, so she decided to go back to the room. Although they said that she had not eaten yet, just like Devancia, so the man offered to eat with him. The lady appreciated his words very much, but she did not mean it at all. But before she could finish speaking, she was interrupted. His Highness didn't care about her words. He had already invited Ariel to his room. It seems he is used to this, so he arranges the situation so that a person of lower status cannot refuse outright. For example, as a girl, he probably did it to tease Skylar. And to his good fortune or misfortune, such a provocation worked well on the prince. He pinned his brother against the wall, not wanting to let him go out of anger. The boy was disgusted to watch and listen to Devancia's antics. A strange man and a strange environment. The atmosphere is so tense. The lady wouldn't have been surprised if blades had flown. It was already too dangerous to stay near them. So Ariel said that she heard that His Highness was not feeling well. So if she stays, it will be disrespectful to His tired Highness. That's why she wanted to go back to her room, even after he said he was fine. But the girl still asked to be allowed to leave. She didn't want to be around them anymore. There was nothing to be done. The lady looked too pathetic, so they let her go. It was a relief because now she wouldn't be caught between two fires. Judging by the expression on Skylar's face, it didn't seem like he was angry about it. In that case, since everything was resolved on a smoother note, Ariel can leave in peace. By the time she had already reached her room, where she could at least rest a little, the light in the room was turned off, and the key to the room was still lying near the door. Now no one could come to her at such a moment, especially after what happened. They said she just needed to register at the academy. There was too much going on. Ariel couldn't cope anymore. If she had stayed there a little longer, she might have made a mistake. Although now she could finally rest, at least for a minute, at least a little. The girl could no longer bear it. Lying on her bed, she only looked out the window. But after a few seconds, some dark silhouette appeared outside the window. Even at such a moment, she could not take a break. But who was outside the window? Fear enveloped the whole body because it could have been anyone, even with evil intentions. But just a few moments later, the very man who was standing there appeared. It was Skylar, but why did he decide to come to her without going through the door? But the prince did not want to tell her about it at all, because he was too embarrassed. Sometimes Ariel wished the guy would at least explain things. The answer did not take long to come, because the prince heard that she had not had dinner that day. He learned this from the maid, which means that everything the lady does is also reported. After all, it was the guy who invited the guest on his behalf, so he should at least know what she does. For which the girl could not help but thank him, because he was so worried about the lady. But Skylar didn't come to Huxley just to talk. He brought with him a red box neatly tied with a ribbon. She should have eaten, because if his guest remained hungry, what would they think of him? But still, it was very nice, because Ariel was really hungry all this time. In this way, he was definitely showing concern, apparently due to the level of affection. So Ariel couldn't just refuse such a sweet gift. All this time she had been looking down at the box, but as soon as she accepted it, she decided to look up. And all this time the prince looked straight at her, causing them to meet each other's eyes. Because of this, he couldn't help but feel embarrassed, because now they were very close. But all this time, he was also curious about why she rejected the crown prince's proposal. It was simple. It would have been disrespectful to Skylar. After all, it was he who invited the lady, and if someone behaves rudely to him, she cannot approve of it. Even if it was the crown prince, there was still something to remember. Every action a girl takes affects her family's reputation, so it was worth acting accordingly. And since his name is involved here, we must not let our guard down and act wisely. From now on, she must keep within limits and not show herself unnecessarily. It was really sweet that the guy was so worried about Ariel. As soon as he left, it was possible to open the main gift that was on the table. Inside was a sweet strawberry pie that was so tempting in appearance. The outside was covered with a hard icing sugar coating, and the inside contained fruit. This cake was an exact description of Skylar. It was exactly the same. At that moment, she remembered the device, and looking into it, there were new changes. His sympathy was now at level 1. So far, the relationship with him was not bad. Everything was going easier and faster than she expected, and now she could calm down a little. Meanwhile, it was raining outside, which only added to the tiredness. After some time, something was happening in the Crown Prince's office. It was about Ariel Huxley. Now one of the close maids came to him. It was all because she hadn't taken the aptitude test yet. She didn't even take the basic mana test, should she take a comprehensive test in addition to the basic one. It was a good idea. In that case, we need to call an observer, which will not happen. The Crown Prince ordered not to invite anyone. He would be alone with her. By excluding the Count from this case, it was impossible to disclose the true result. By sending forged documents to the imperial palace or county, magic is useless. The empire that conquered the continent with magic is extremely strict in matters of magic. Moreover, this is connected with the foundation of the state, so the results of the mana test obtained during the ability test must be reported to the empire. Concealing such information is considered a serious crime against imperial laws. Both the perpetrators and those who know about these circumstances are subject to severe punishment, including the death penalty. This was an act that even the Crown Prince would not be forgiven, which was very dangerous. But the man didn't care about the risk. Sienna had to obey because his words were quite clear. At this time, the girl was sitting in her room and eating a cake that Skylar brought. Both guys were too busy for her to meet them, and one of them was also sick. Under current conditions, the girl will not be able to continue to improve her level with them. But now it was no longer so important, because one of the maids came to her with an envelope in her hands. It was from His Highness the Crown Prince. He was the one who sent her the invitation. At this point, a window appeared with a workaround that affected the ending. If Ariel agrees now, she will receive a reward, but if not, she will face a fine. Now it was clear what was in the envelope, but why Devancia? Choose a penalty and minimize the impact on the ending, or choose a reward and take a risk. But then the ending could change. The problem is that no matter what choice she makes, it's not clear what's best for her. The man wanted to conduct a test of magical abilities for selected nobles with her. He wrote this letter as if to a close friend. It was completely unclear what was on his mind. And also this conversation with Skylar, he just became interested in Huxley. Or she uses it to tease the guy. Ariel's body was weak, so she never passed the test for magical abilities. And the imperial family gives her what she should have done before she turned 10. If she refused the invitation, it would mean that the Count's family rejected the Crown Prince's favor. All that remained was to see what would come of it, hoping that it would be nothing serious. While the girl was sitting at the table and thinking, one of the targets came into her room. It was His Highness the Prince, but why did he come at such a moment? He had just arrived and seen her, but he could already notice that she had been dozing earlier. The lady was now acting as relaxed as if she were in her own home, although their guy also behaved as if he was in his own home. But now was not the time for that. She was wondering why he had come to her, although he could have come without any reason. It seemed like the girl wasn't fully awake yet. It was time to go inside and stop talking nonsense. In the end, the guy explained the reason for his visit, asking to bring the documents he had given earlier. Now everything has become clearer, but what documents exactly were needed? Skylar only needed the last page. There was no point in bringing it all at once. The lady thought he was very busy and thought he would give her a little slack to rest. But the guy got things done so quickly that he didn't give Ariel any rest. Now, after just a short time, the necessary documents lay before the prince. She should have kept them more carefully. The prince would send confirmation to the academy separately. But I thought that the lady would also need something to prove the translation. In this case, the girl will definitely save everything properly, as she was advised. At that moment, she noticed that Skylar's mood had worsened. Perhaps she had done something wrong. Suddenly remembering the letter from Devansha, perhaps that was the reason. Should she have told him that the crown prince had invited her, or did he already know about it and that was why he had come? But in the end, Ariel decided not to tell anyone about the man's invitation for now. Therefore, the lady decided to ask His Highness again what she had done to spoil his mood. As it turned out, Skylar didn't like the fact that the girl apologized to him so often for trifles. Perhaps her greeting was too tense. Perhaps he thought she was trying to keep her distance. It was necessary to try to correct the situation, because the lady was really very grateful and said it only twice. If you think about it, the guy really did respond well, and since they had decided everything, it was time for her to find a way to get home on her own. This was good advice, but with these words, His Highness the Prince decided to take his leave and go about his business. But looking at Skylar's face, even from his back, you could see that he was very embarrassed. Most likely, this is why the guy hurried away so quickly, so that the lady would not see him in such a state. But now the question remained, how could the girl return home now, since she was in the imperial palace as a guest? To Ariel's surprise, Skylar had already taken care of everything, including her trip back to the Earl's estate. The carriage was already waiting for the lady, and when she returned home, she immediately went to explain everything that had happened to her. Although the mother only replied that she understood everything, and their conversation ended as smoothly and dryly as it began. After which she found herself back in her room after such a long stay in the imperial palace. Before she had time to recover from such an exhausting trip, there was a knock on her door. It was one of the maids who had been so eagerly awaiting the girl's arrival all this time she had been absent. But now she was at home, and during the week that was given to her, she occasionally went out for walks, as before. She mostly attended the required classes, read books, or chatted with Canon in her free time, but other than that, she didn't have much to do. Meanwhile, Huxley compiled a list of the targets she had met over the years, including Skylar, Raishan, and Devansha. She wrote down everything she could find out about them so that she wouldn't have to check her phone every time and would remember everything exactly. If she puts everything in order, she gets a general idea of how best to approach them. And if there was a mystery, it was the Crown Prince's affection. One could only hope that nothing would happen during the ability test. Just as she was thinking about this, she was informed that the royal family had sent a carriage for her. The day has come when Ariel will be tested for magical abilities, something she should have done a long time ago. She couldn't delay, otherwise they might think she was against the test. After some time, they arrived at their destination, where the ladies were already supposed to be waiting. All this time, the girl followed the maid and thought about her own things, because the atmosphere was not the best. Because of this, she didn't know how much distance was left, but when she looked up, there was only a little bit left. In the doorway in front of her, Ariel saw a familiar silhouette that belonged to a man. It was the Crown Prince of Devansha, who had apparently been waiting for the girl all this time. As soon as she and the maid reached the man, the lady immediately greeted him, not forgetting to thank him for the invitation. But there was no need to be so tense. It was as if he was reading her like an open book. After all, the girl was really tense because he would be present all this time. I needed to somehow distract myself from such an oppressive atmosphere, deciding to look around a little at the door. In the next room, there was an incomprehensible device that glowed in different colors. But where were all the others? Perhaps they hadn't arrived yet, because the letter said something completely different. As it turned out, Ariel was the only noblewoman who had not yet taken the aptitude test. Although the invitation stated that the chosen nobles were being invited, the chosen could also mean one person. But today only the Count's daughter was needed, and today's test will be conducted by the Crown Prince himself. The girl should have known that nobles usually take the test in the palace. She knew. That was exactly why the lady had been sitting over her textbooks for so long and studying everything. All this time the man looked at Huxley, as if trying to crush the ground under her or somehow hurt her. continuing to say that the test for magical abilities is usually done at about 5 years of age, but in extreme cases, for various problems, it can be carried out for up to 10 years, but the lady never passed it. It happened due to personal circumstances. She was sick a lot and simply missed this opportunity. Now everything was fine, because the main thing was to do it now and not delay it any longer. This was good news, for which the lady thanked him for his understanding of her unavoidable circumstances. Devantia was just about to say something to her when he suddenly felt ill, which no one really expected. Ariel was worried about His Highness, offering to call a maid, but he refused. There was no need to worry so much. Although if he felt too bad, the man should rest, because she could come back another time. But she should have listened to him because the royal family didn't have that much time, so they would finish everything today. After these words, the crown prince immediately recovered, although it was still clear from his face that he was feeling ill. This behavior was only frightening because Ariel was so worried about him, but he did not give in at all. Still, Devantia was a very strange and incomprehensible target even for the system, and only at that moment the girl noticed that the door had been locked all this time. Perhaps they were afraid that she would escape in the process. Or they were worried that someone would disturb them during the procedure, but it still scared the crap out of them. But now the man was reassuring her she shouldn't have been so wary, because it was just a test. In response to her question, the door was closed for security reasons, but the test itself will not take long. The lady was too tense because, frankly speaking, the man had not called her here just for the test. He wanted to get to know Huxley better in this way, and it was a great honor for her to get close to him. In that case, he suggested skipping the test altogether, although it would still have been better to take it. Now the crown prince seemed more frightening than before, although it was just a joke. And looking at him again, he now seemed kinder and more open than before. Now that all the empty talk was over, it was time to start with the thing in the middle. Pointing to the very thing that illuminated the entire room, the girl looked at it again. Apparently, this unusual thing was a testing device, which turned out to be exactly the case. Seeing Ariel's nervousness about the upcoming magical ability test, Devantia took her hand. She shouldn't have worried so much because nothing terrible should happen. But he took her hand not only to calm her down and somehow get closer to the girl. He took her to guide her through the test, placing her on the device and calming her down at the same time. The moment Ariel touched the strange device that measured magical abilities, it began to glow. It was as if mana was emanating from him, enveloping them and the entire room, causing it to sparkle. The moment was very romantic, but there was no point in getting too caught up in the prince's funny face. Now she had to look ahead, but what should she do? The answer came quickly. She just needed to relax. They stood like that for some time, after which the device began to glow even more intensely. It was like a fairy tale. Meanwhile, the crown prince did not want to let go of the lady's hand. All this time he looked only at the count's daughter and admired her, which was starting to get a little annoying. The girl did not like such closeness with His Highness at all, because he behaved too assertively. She would have liked to tell him to keep his distance, but she couldn't because of the man's status. Now it was necessary to concentrate, because now mana was coming out of the device, which created an image of space. It was amazing and even a little scary, but Devantia just watched it silently. As soon as everything started to end, it could only mean one thing: it was all over. Finally, it was possible to calm down a little, but the question remained as to when the test results would be available. It was quite difficult to answer this question, since it depended on the person, so he could not give an exact time frame. But Huxley wanted to know at least an approximate time frame. It could take a week or a month, or maybe even more. This was at least some kind of explanation. She could not help but thank him for this, and for the fact that he conducted the test for the lady. In that case, the girl was now free to leave, which Devantia could not allow, having offered to help stop the bleeding on her finger. Again, an obvious temptation. She's probably just an interesting chess piece to him, like everyone else. Whether it was just something to irritate Skylar a little longer, or just a fun toy, that's probably how he saw her. Although Ariel felt his sincere behavior, his high status made it hard to reject him. How to deal with such a person now? She thought so hard that the crown prince could not help but notice. But it was just a misunderstanding. She didn't think about anything like that. He shouldn't know about it. The man immediately understood what she was probably thinking, immediately answering that he was not doing anything with the intention that she imagined. Now His Highness the Prince looked truly worried. She had never seen such an expression on his face before. But realizing what he really was, the girl lied that she had not made any judgments about him, although Ariel remained silent for quite a long time, which indicated that she had thoughts. And if she was honest, Devantia wouldn't be angry, but the girl continued to deny everything. The man still understood that she had lied to him, but he still forgave her for the lie she had just told. Since the test was already over, the girl wanted to return home as soon as possible, just to be far away from here. But the Crown Prince was not going to let her go so quickly. The lady was too cruel to him. After all, now she began to interest him much more, and if she lured him, he could give her power, wealth, and everything else. He said some very strange things, but why he obviously had some kind of cunning plan of his own. Even though he spoke enticing words to her, wanting to get along with Ariel, for her to be kind to him, just to get closer to her. At this moment, while the Crown Prince was trying to lure the Count's daughter into his trap, the door to the room finally opened, and Skylar stood in the doorway, furious at the sight of his lady trying to take him away. But why was he here, since apparently he had no idea that the man had called her here? At the same time, the doors to the room were closed all this time. It was almost impossible to find them. He wanted to do some things, but now they would have to be postponed, because the guy did not want to let this pass by his eyes. It was terrible because now Huxley would have to endure it for now. These words angered the guy even more. His Highness the Prince was angered by everything that was happening now because Devantia was once again trying to take everything away from him. Because of this, he began to shout in the presence of the guests in a terrible tone, which he could not help but comment on. It looks like he needs to relearn etiquette. He clearly needed to work on his manners, since he is the younger brother and his rank is lower than the Crown Prince. No matter what punishment she gets for deviating from the plot now, maybe she shouldn't have come here. While the girl was thinking about this, two guys who were arguing among themselves shouted at Ariel. She couldn't understand what was happening, still not realizing that they were arguing over her. But because both boys called her, she couldn't help but turn around to look at one of them. And the decision that the lady made did not please Skylar at all, but only shocked him. There was no other reason to turn around, but the Crown Prince's voice sounded calmer and louder. Skylar's voice was shaking with rage and sounded a little quieter, but because of this decision, the affection for him diminished. Now she was one step further than before, simply because she turned to Devantia. But this only pleased one of the brothers, because in this way he showed power over the other. At this time, while everyone was living their normal lives, a fierce war was taking place on the other side. A mountain of soldiers' corpses lay at every step. It was impossible to count how many deaths there were. But still, one of them remained alive. He walked evenly and confidently, because this battle seemed boring to him. It was a red-haired man who was wondering if there was anything more interesting than the usual power struggle and all that. On the other side, in the Imperial Palace, Ariel has just lost one of her hearts with Skylar. The trust she had worked so hard to build was now gone down the drain. The girl wanted to stop the guy and explain herself before he left, but she was not allowed to do so. The Crown Prince understood that she was now worried about the current situation. But this was already a family matter and she had nothing to do here, so he asked her not to follow him. She tried to say something to him because she didn't want to just stand and watch this. Of course, they didn't listen to her, asking her to wait until the man sorted it all out himself. The lady couldn't interfere because he said that Skylar was angry not because of her, but because of Devantia. Because he had been doing such things for a long time, she could not interfere in the royal family's infighting. However, she couldn't stand idly by, so she had to lie to him that everything would be fine, and he could go. So he suggested that there was a waiting room at the end of the corridor where she could wait for him. He would be back soon, so it was worth hurrying. With these words, Devantia left the room. Of course, the Count's daughter had no intention of obeying the Crown Prince's orders. She had a different plan. After all, she knew for sure, despite all the words of comfort, that Skylar took everything completely differently. After some more time, when the lady was sure that everyone had gone far enough, it was time to go out. The girl couldn't leave the Crown Prince alone with Skylar in such a situation. She needed to at least see what was happening and explain everything to the prince, but to do that, she had to find them first. Using the device, she walked towards them to first assess the situation. But everything had to be done extremely carefully so that the Crown Prince would definitely not be able to catch her. As soon as she reached the right place, she immediately heard the screams of the guy who was yelling at Devantia. In his opinion, he wanted Ariel to become his lover, because even for this, he checked her personally. Although he had no intention of taking her, and if his younger brother was so gentle, he was ready to leave the academy. But when Rex returns, he will regain control of his territory and continue to do what he did before. He had no intention of calming down, because now that he had become the crown prince, all the local nobility would line up to see him. So why waste time on the countess's daughter? The answer was simple. He had no intention of using her for political purposes. Because why everything Skylar had seemed so attractive now made it clear what was on Devancia's mind. But as soon as he received it, he immediately became bored. Apparently, he would be happier if he lost everything. The crown prince did not believe his brother at all, because it was so disrespectful to his mother. He tried to hurt the prince to the end by using his mother, who was so dear to him. He should have kept quiet, because the man never mourned her, which only defiled his face. But Devancia was in no position to grieve then, for it was too tiring. Skylar had had enough of hearing all this nonsense from the elder, so he decided to end the conversation with him quickly and clearly. He took off the silver bracelet that he had been wearing on his hand all this time and threw it straight into the lake. All this time the girl watched this and did not understand why he did it. But not only she did not understand, but also the crown prince, who was surprised by such an act. This bracelet could still be seen at the bottom of the lake, and, as it turned out, this bracelet was a memory of his mother. The fact that the guy threw away the only memory of his mother could not help but surprise the lady. After all, he threw away with complete confidence such an important and dear thing to himself that he always carried with him. And all the while he looked only down, trying to hide all his emotions, which he did very well. But while both brothers stood silently, not daring to look away, they still had to do it. It was at that moment that Ariel could no longer watch Skylar being humiliated like that. She jumped straight into that very lake just to get the bracelet in memory of his mother. The girl was all wet again because she climbed into the water, and just as she wanted to say something, she was again stopped. The crown prince also watched this whole scene and was shocked by such disobedience on her part, because of which the man could no longer just stand and watch, because of which he immediately rushed towards the lady. As soon as he approached her, he immediately became worried about her, because Huxley was probably terribly cold. I needed to go inside and change my things as quickly as possible, but going with him now wouldn't be the best decision. She had another priority right now, Skylar, which meant she had to turn down his kindness. After all, right now she needed to tell His Highness something. She tried to say it as gently as possible, because in front of her stood a person of higher status than her. The crown prince certainly didn't expect such an answer, since he had more power than his brother. Besides, Skylar certainly didn't expect that answer either. But looking at how Ariel was shivering from the cold because of her damp clothes, it was impossible to remain indifferent. Fortunately, despite such disrespectful treatment of the crown prince, he did not become angry. He simply decided to let the situation go, wishing she didn't catch a cold, because he would be sad if she got sick. It was a little embarrassing, and at the same time such behavior was frightening, but it was impossible to show it. Having seen Devancia trying to get the count's daughter, the prince could not stand it. He grabbed the girl by the hand, trying to take her as far away from this psychopath as possible, leaving the man all alone to stand in the lake and continue to get wet, which couldn't help but anger him. Although he didn't show it all the time, he was angry that Huxley didn't want to look in his direction at all. The guy quickly took Ariel away, although she was a little slower than his pace. They walked along long corridors in some unknown direction, but after some time, Skylar decided to stop. Finally, it was possible to rest at least a little, but everything was not so simple. His Majesty could not understand what was in the girl's head if she had undertaken such a risky undertaking. But she remained silent all this time, not making a sound, which is why he decided to turn in her direction. Looking again at how the Count's daughter looked now, memories of that day came flooding back to him. Now she looked almost the same as when she was looking for a stone for him, all wet and naive. These memories were not only in the prince, but also in the girl, because he looked the same as he did then. This whole picture made Skylar feel confused. He didn't understand at all what she was thinking. But first, she should change her clothes, because it was indecent to walk around the palace like that. It was very helpful to ask one of the maids to bring her a change of clothes, which was done. The lady quickly took the new clothes, which, surprisingly, seemed to have been made just for her. It didn't take long to change, and soon she had the new clothes on. And while Ariel was all alone in the room, there was a chance to get the device out and check everything. Once all the business was finished, she could return to the prince who had been waiting for her all this time. Upon entering the room, the lady was immediately offered a seat, as they were about to have what might not be the most pleasant conversation. The girl obeyed and sat down not far from the guy, even though it was clear from his appearance that this was not the right place. But His Highness could not say this because he was too embarrassed for such a thing. Luckily, the girl immediately understood from his look that he wanted the lady to sit down next to him. Now it was time to start a conversation. Skylar decided to ask directly why she went into the water. It was awkward to talk about such a thing, because the Count's daughter did it impulsively without thinking at all. He immediately realized that she was probably following him or Devancia, which only surprised him. After all, now she learned that he was acquainted with His Highness the Crown Prince, whom it was impossible not to know. And yet, he still didn't receive an answer to the question of why the girl decided to pick up this thing. After all, it was because of the bracelet that was thrown into the lake that she climbed there. The moment the prince threw it away, the bracelet ceased to belong to him or anyone else. So now Huxley could take him for herself or even throw him away. He was too stubborn. Losing something must be painful, especially if it was a memory of a deceased mother. Because the girl could not accept such an answer, she should not have thrown it away. She wanted Skylar to keep this bracelet because it was too important to him. The girl asked not to throw it away. It was such a small wish of hers. The man was shocked by her words, and at the same time did not understand why she wanted it that way. But it was all simple. She understood that this thing was important to him. That's why she went into the river. She would have been tormented by her conscience for the rest of her life if she had not done this for a lady. This was important. Ariel's words touched His Highness the Prince, because she did not spare herself, just for him. He did not expect at all that the lady would choose his side, when just recently she had chosen not his side. Because of this act, the guy could not restrain himself and took Huxley by the hand. He was about to kiss the girl because she was also approaching him, but Skylar quickly came to his senses and, due to embarrassment, was unable to continue and pulled away. Apparently, he had completely lost his mind, not understanding how something like this had almost happened. He wanted to be alone now and think everything over, asking the girl to leave him. For her peace of mind, he was not going to throw away the bracelet now, but now she had to leave. Ariel still didn't quite understand what had come over him, but she decided to simply leave silently as he had asked. As soon as she left, the guy kept replaying the same moment in his head. How the girl asked with all her heart to keep the bracelet, because it was important not only for her. At the same moment, Huxley was walking along the corridors of the Imperial Palace. There was no one nearby, so I could calmly look into the device, where there were only positive messages. Thinking about what was really going on, he decided to throw away the bracelet to avoid talking to the Crown Prince. Now the girl was worried about Devancia's sympathy, but Skylar was much closer to the goal. It would be great if everything continued like this, but I had to continue to be positive and think about the good. While the Count's daughter was pondering what had happened, she did not notice that her target was nearby. It was Ratian de Solem, whom she almost crashed into while walking. The man, as usual, looked serious and gloomy, but his appearance was only attractive. But he appeared just as unexpectedly as he had gone off in some direction on his own business, leaving the lady alone by the wall to think about what had just happened. Apparently the man didn't notice her, since he didn't pay even the slightest attention. Although this world was full of magical items, they were not very common. But remembering the warning that it should not be ignored, all other thoughts faded into the background. It was necessary to return home quickly so that nothing else would happen. She already had too many problems for just one day. At the same time, while Ratian was going about his business, he tried to understand what the girl had hidden as soon as he appeared. After all, this was clearly not some ordinary object to hide from a stranger. While the man was thinking about this, he managed to reach the right room, where he had been heading all this time. There was already a red-haired guy waiting for him in the room, who immediately noticed him. But Ratian was concerned about the question of when he had managed to return from the war. Everyone said the same thing, which was too formal, because in reality he didn't care that he had arrived. Ratian spoke too formally, because in reality he didn't care that he had arrived. The man decided not to answer his question, but simply sat down opposite him and asked how things were in the south. But there was nothing special there in his opinion, just a large number of decomposing bodies. But that's not what he was talking about, what the situation was like in general, but it would be nice to go to the battlefield again. Although the question remained about the academy he was supposed to attend, Lexus did go there. He had to visit there at least once, but it was clear that the man wanted to regain his title of Crown Prince. He probably won't leave politics that easily, but entering the academy shouldn't change anything. But he already knew everything they taught there, so there was no need for it. He was just going to increase his popularity. At the same time, he will show off his skills, and if he finds stability, he will most likely choose a more carefree life. And even though Raishin actually came to see him, he remained the same. While he was flying in the clouds, Lexus reported that while he was gone for a while, it turned out that the Crown Prince was ill. Of course, the interlocutor had not heard anything about this, even though he had been in the capital all this time, compared to him. He was too indifferent, but everything was not so. It seemed strange to him that the Crown Prince was ill. It must have been due to a lack of magic, which also seemed strange, although it didn't look like a lie. And since he was talking about it, the man decided to say that Skylar had found a girl with black hair and eyes of the same color. Her skin was pale, as if it had never seen the sun. She was of average height, with a slender figure and an emotionless face. It is possible that she was one of the courtesans caught between the two princes, and it is even possible that Devancia's fortune may be linked to this woman. But just hearing about a girl with such incredible beauty once, Lexus immediately became interested. He wanted to hear more about her, but he could only say that she was beautiful, as he thought. It was incredible to hear Raishin say something like that about some girl. At this point, their conversation was over. He had nothing more to say, so the man would go first. But the red-haired man didn't care. He stood up from his seat, not listening to his interlocutor, heading towards the exit. It was immediately clear that he was heading to see the very woman who had been so vividly described earlier. He set himself the goal of seeing her at any cost, having convinced himself of everything. But by the time Lexus was heading towards the palace exit, the car with Ariel had already left. She finally got out of the Imperial Palace and could now at least get some rest, although the question remained as to who had prepared the transport. Since she had arrived at His Highness's invitation, it must have been him. Should she thank him the next time they met, or leave things as they were? In the meantime, Haxie was too tired, fortunately. The journey would take about 2 hours, so she could relax. Just when she was able to relax a little, things went completely wrong. The driver slammed the car on the brakes, frightened by something that was now right in front of them. It was Lexus who was able to catch up with the girl's carriage and stop it, because he was too curious. For a moment, she thought it was Raishin again, but seeing the red hair, it was definitely not him. The very next second, the man broke the front window with just one blow of his hand. The driver tried to explain to the Archduke that such behavior was dangerous, but he did not want to listen to him. He only ordered them to get out quickly, since it was not for him that they had come all this way. At this point, the target information was updated. Apparently, this guy was the last target she was looking for. This man's name was Lexus Cresian, and unfortunately, there is no information available about him yet. All this time, Ariel couldn't even move from fear, because his voice was low and deep. But looking at how the driver was trembling with fear all this time, there was nothing left to do but obey. The girl decided to go out to him, but she also noticed from his behavior that the guy was used to fighting. A lot of thoughts were spinning in her head because she had just left the epicenter of the disaster. And another one appeared on her path, a man who was not ashamed of his actions. He grabbed the lady's face to examine her more closely. After all, Raishin had told the truth. Although Lexus didn't think she was that beautiful, Huxley exceeded all his expectations, making it worth catching up with her. All this time, the man drilled her with his predator-like gaze, finally deigning to ask her name. The girl introduced herself as Ariel Huxley from Huxley County, and although she was scared, her face showed almost no emotion. This behavior only amused the man more. He couldn't stop looking at her. And yet, after a while, he let go of the girl's face, assessing it fully as best he could. But his behavior seemed completely incomprehensible. He was like a bomb that could explode at any moment. Although he looked very stern and serious, he immediately showed his true nature. He was not as serious as he seemed, so he asked to be called Prince. At that moment, a window appeared in front of the lady, and her sympathy with Lexus grew. It was surprising, because they had only known each other for a few minutes, but their sympathy had already risen so quickly. But even though she grew up so quickly, Ariel wasn't happy about it at all. After a little while, the man decided to find out where she was heading and offered to go together. It all seemed completely strange and incomprehensible. He looked like a cruel tyrant, but spoke to her so casually. Apparently, he did not intend to stop at this first meeting, deciding to get to know her even better. But Raishin, who still remained in the imperial palace, was watching this whole performance. There was nothing left to do but to go back on the road with my new acquaintance. This new environment was not the most comfortable for the girl because she really wanted to just relax. But now all that was left was to endure the company of such an unusual target that he was too persistent. The man acted as if nothing had happened, with a satisfied smile on his face. While they were riding, the lady had a question for His Highness, which the red-haired man did not like very much. Whether she wanted to call him by his first name was surprising, because she didn't know that was possible. It was cheeky, but she wanted to get to the Count's mansion, so she asked to be dropped off on the way there. It would have been enough to go somewhere nearby, but these words seemed to anger the man. Lexus said that she wasn't going anywhere, because he didn't say that he wasn't heading where she was. Although all this time Ariel thought that he was heading to the Duke's residence. It was as if she was hinting that she wanted a man to go there, which was not the case at all. She should have relaxed already, but it was difficult, because he was going not to the ducal residence, but to the Count. The Duke himself is not going to his residence, but is going to the Count. Huxley could not go there with him. She had neither the strength nor the desire to compete with Lexus. Now of all the targets, he was the most difficult to predict. She tried to stop the man somehow, but he didn't listen, and it was too late. They were almost there. In addition, the man noticed that the lady looked tired the whole time, but did not fall asleep even by the end of the journey. But did she think about how many seconds she would have to escape before he could catch her? The man would have given her a maximum of 5, definitely no more, although Ariel didn't have even a second to think about it. After all, if the outcome is already predetermined, then why even try to do anything? There were so many questions left about why he was still with her. It seemed like he was checking, but why would he do that? The girl was very perceptive, which only amused the red-haired man more and more. But Ariel was too tired. They would arrive soon, but it seemed that she would pass out much earlier. Of course, he couldn't ignore the lady's state, thinking that she was always so weak. It was all because she had been in the river for a while, but that was enough to make her exhausted. Usually in such a situation, people ask how she managed to end up in the river, especially in the capital. But it seemed like he didn't care about it at all, but he wasn't going to leave everything like that either. Some kind of magical power began to emerge from his hand, which enveloped the girl completely. And with just one word, he made the lady fall asleep. It was time to stop pretending that she was about to collapse from fatigue. Moments later, the girl fell asleep like a baby, nestled comfortably on Lexus's shoulder. A lot of time passed from that moment, and the girl was already lying in her bed. After such a long time, she finally began to come to her senses and open her eyes. All this time, she was looked after and cared for by a maid who noticed Ariel's awakening. That very maid turned out to be Kanan, the person she so longed to see again. But the lady did not understand what she was doing in bed. As it turned out, Her Highness the Duke had carried her in his arms. When the man first walked in, he said that the girl suddenly fell asleep in the car while they were driving. Apparently, she was feeling so bad that she seemed to faint. But Kanan was only concerned about one thing. Now, was everything okay with her? Luckily, everything was okay. Although the girl did not understand at all everything that had happened during this time. Besides this, she was worried whether anyone had seen her magical artifact that had been with her all this time. The maid immediately realized that she was talking about the white object on the table, remembering that it was some kind of talisman. The servants in the mansion already knew about the existence of the mobile phone, which is why they had to say that it was a personal, magical artifact. But this won't work with the high aristocrats. They are well versed in artifacts and will most likely find him suspicious. Luckily, Kanan had tidied it up while she was cleaning, so no one would notice it. This was the best news, followed by not so good news. His Highness, who had carried her in his arms, was now below, and it was necessary to go down as quickly as possible. Just the thought of having to talk to Lexus made her mood worse. But there's nothing to be done about it. She'll have to go down, in which case the maid will bring her a change of clothes. Once Kanan had left to get all her things, the device could be used without any problems. She wanted to know more about Lexus, and the information about him was not the best. The man was, after all, connected to the imperial family, and she had already personally experienced his propensity for violence. It was like a mine that had been planted in the house, which only frightened Huxley more. By the time the girl was almost ready, the Countess came to her. The woman reported that His Highness was waiting for her in the room. All that remained was to meet him. Although the girl did not want to see this man, she still entered Lexus's room. He was very surprised by this because he didn't expect the girl to have already woken up. After all, he deliberately used strong magic that should have knocked her out for 2 hours. But Ariel didn't understand at all what he was talking about because she didn't know the meaning of power at all. Now he was absolutely sure that the Count had really kept her locked up as he had said. Only then did the lady remember that before passing out in the car, he had actually ordered her to sleep. Just one word made her fall asleep, as if on command, which only made it more frightening. Of course, such a change in mood was hard to miss, so the man offered to sit next to her. But the girl continued to look away and remain silent, which only made him angry, because the fact that she was sitting a little further away would prevent him from approaching. With these words, he only frightened her, although this was someone else's mansion, so it was unlikely that he would make a scene here. She needed a change of scenery, so Ariel decided to find out the meaning of the word of power. After all, she was afraid to come closer to a person who could force her to act against her will. She didn't want to lose consciousness again just by someone's will. While the lady was saying these words, her hands couldn't stop shaking. Now Lexus understood Huxley's caution, but her behavior seemed interesting. But it was still worth answering the question, otherwise the lady would continue to be afraid of her. The language of sorcery was literally a verbal command, but with little magical power. He forced them to respond instantly to the command, and if necessary, partially forced them to act. Commanders and superiors use it to subordinate their subordinates. He helped stop sudden actions and control the squad, which was necessary. But only simple commands are possible, and if the user is inexperienced, the effect is almost non-existent. So it couldn't stun anyone, much less cause any pain, and it couldn't be abused. The limits are very clear, so if the object strongly resists, the command will not work. However, a tired person can be ordered to rest, which works quite well, since a tired person's resistance is weaker. Just like Ariel, it looked like she thought he was going to do something terrible to her. Although he had no intention of forcibly endangering her, since the language of sorcery was not a universal tool for brainwashing. The man had a look on his face the whole time as if he was having a lot of fun, while the lady's whole face was red, as if she was about to explode. It was too funny that the man couldn't stop laughing at her. Although he behaved in this way around her, he did not have any of the miserable passions of a prince's heir to take from others. Although this girl was very attractive in appearance and character, it was as if he continued to evaluate her from different angles, but as soon as she went to the academy, she would find out more than he said. Lexus had already heard that she was going to enroll this year, which was true. In that case, when she enters the academy, let her immediately ask Lex for help. Ariel didn't understand who he was talking about, even though the man was right in front of her. Finally, the atmosphere between them became much better than it was at the very beginning. Now the girl would call the man Sun Bae, which only made him happy. Now he looked kind and smiling, not at all like a walking Mina. But considering what happened recently with Devancia and how he kicked out the car window, it was probably him that the Crown Prince was talking about earlier, advising not to chase after him. Because the girl remained silent, Lexus thought that she did not want to agree to his proposal. Although his face seemed more real, so maybe I shouldn't have focused on it so much. For which the lady thanked him, which improved the man's mood. He seemed to return to his normal state after these words. But it was not clear from him whether the man was going to lie to her or not. As they sat in silence, looking into each other's eyes, the man thought she was trying to bewitch him, which was not true at all. The girl didn't even give any hint that she liked him. This topic did not linger for long, because Lexus continued to offer to come to him as soon as she did so. But at that moment, his gaze was more like that of a predator trying to take away its prey. Once again, Lexus frightened the girl, only now with his gaze it was clear what he was like. After all, he was now very close to Ariel, saying that she needed to nod to such a proposal. The lady did not understand what she could have done to cause his mood to change so abruptly. But at that moment, a frightened Skylar ran into their room, apparently in a great hurry. No one expected a guy to come running to them so unexpectedly, which even scared them a little. After all, you could see how scared and sweaty he was, and it was immediately clear that something serious had happened. As it turned out, while they were chatting here, an incident occurred and a report was received. But what was more serious was that His Highness the Prince teleported when it was not at all convenient for him. Magic was a very convenient thing, and many who possessed it relied on it too much. This convenience sometimes paralyzes the mind, and aristocrats with a high concentration of magical energy and members of royal families often use it thoughtlessly. Even when tools or machines would be more effective, this most often happens when the mind is clouded by emotions. Although Lexus did not understand at all what could have happened that made him hurry so much. Perhaps the whole problem was this girl, because he was probably informed about the recent situation. It was clear that Ariel was just as worried about the guy, which meant she wasn't that simple. As soon as Skylar saw the lady completely okay, he immediately calmed down. After all, now he knew for sure that she was okay and nothing terrible had happened. Although he still couldn't come to his senses, the sweat continued to flow down his face. Huxley was just as worried about his condition as he was, but fortunately, everything was fine. Lexus, who was located not far from them, continued to watch this whole performance, and the prince did not like the man's presence here at all, because he was supposed to be in the south. Apparently, he still considered himself an aristocrat after everything that had happened before. But before saying anything to him, Skylar should have paid attention to his condition. Only at that moment did he realize what a stupid thing he had done in the heat of the moment. All his clothes were wet and beads of sweat were running down his body. He didn't look his best. Considering his status, it was humiliating, causing his face to turn red. The girl wanted him to sit down while the lady called the maid to prepare a towel for washing. But he didn't want to listen to her at all, only ordering her not to come closer to him. Even though Ariel kept trying to persuade him to at least give her a towel, the guy just refused. After all, now he was humiliated worse than ever. He didn't understand what to do now. It was impossible to continue standing there in such a terrible state. Something had to be done. But he couldn't think of anything, because right now Ariel and Lexus were looking at the guy. Although the girl simply stood and waited, the man could not hold back his mockery at this time. Skylar was angered by this attitude towards him, asking to step aside for a minute to talk. He didn't want this at all, although there was no reason to stay here. It seemed like a conflict was flaring up between them. The lady just moved away from it, but apparently she couldn't hide. Today, His Highness was especially on edge. It was easier to tell just by looking at him. Perhaps it was because he crashed the king's car, or because he hit on someone he knew. Although one could simply write a letter and that's it, why behave so irrationally? After thinking it all over and putting the puzzle together, he realized that Skylar was not indifferent to her. His face immediately changed, as if he was laughing at the guy when he realized that everything was clear. The man was just about to say his guesses out loud when his mouth was immediately covered with a hand. This was completely out of his style. Huxley no longer understood what was going on between these two. After all, now the prince was behaving like a child who was trying to hide something. He had to stop this somehow, so he couldn't think of anything better to do than ask for a towel. After all, she said that she would bring a towel, water, and clothes, which was exactly the case. As soon as he asked to bring all this, the girl immediately ran out of the room. Finally, they were alone and could calmly talk about what had happened. As expected, Lexus realized that she was his first love since he reacted that way. Even though it was true, it still irritated Skylar a little. But as the prince ordered, the lady found a towel and water. But since he decided not to let anyone close to him, he had to pass everything on through a servant. And now the two men who had just nearly destroyed the mansion were sitting with her mother in the living room, completely without Ariel. No matter how much she thought about what had happened, it seemed to her that he had probably come out of concern for her. But it seems, upon seeing the girl, he was simply embarrassed, remembering his usual restraint and noble manners. This is not surprising. But the question remained, where did he run from to end up in such an exhausted state? There was no point in digging into other people's affairs. Skylar was currently at the highest level of sympathy. And if you weaken your attention, it can quickly decline, as happened quite recently. Maybe he will move away someday and she will have a chance to get a special ending. They say there is no right way to build a relationship with a person, but now one was needed. While the girl was thinking about this, a new system notification arrived on her mobile phone. It stated that if one of the target's affections reached 4 hearts, their individual branch would begin. But after that, increasing the sympathy of other targets will become much more difficult. This was more of a warning than a hint. Now she had 2 hearts for Skylar and 1 for Rexius, while Ratian and Devancia had 0 or an unknown number. If she continues like this, she will get her own branch with the prince. In this case, the special ending will fail. In order to return to your world, it needs everyone to have 3 hearts. But if the number of hearts exceeds, everything will be over, because they all did not get along with each other, and their characters were different. So it's hard to contain them. Since Skylar is avoiding her now, maybe it was worth taking advantage of the moment and even out the balance. From that moment on, the next day arrived, when it was time for Skylar and Lexus to return. Both men were seen off by the Countess and her daughter, although one of them was not particularly pleased with the time spent. It was as if he was waiting for some words from the girl who was standing nearby. Noticing His Highness's gaze on her, Ariel tensed up a little, but remembering her situation and the guy's words, she simply remained silent, turning away. It was as if an invisible wall had appeared between them overnight, preventing them from being together. She would like to tell him something, but it was impossible for the sympathy to change in any way now. All this time, Huxley did not even dare to raise her head and see the men off. But Skylar seemed unable to bear it any longer, asking her to leave with him, as he had something to talk about with her. It seemed a little unusual since they were just about to leave. There was nothing left to do but follow him, even though it was risky at the moment. They had gone far enough away from prying eyes and ears that it was now possible to talk. But while the prince was trying to say something, his gaze was stuck on the girl. It was as if he couldn't take his eyes off her, trying to enjoy her beauty as much as possible. However, he was able to say that the transfer would be completed by the start date of the studies. So on April 10th, she should remember to come properly prepared. That was all he wanted to say, since she was acting under his protection. Now they will only be able to see each other on April 10th. With these words, he left the lady. But the way he gently took her chin, trying to draw attention to himself. The way he was embarrassed, all these actions made his face blush. But thanks to His Highness's words, it was clear that all the plot twists would begin in April. It was necessary to start preparing for how many events would await the girl at the academy. After all, it is there that she will be able to meet all her goals at once. And it will be almost impossible to control them, because anything could happen. A lot of time passed from that moment, and the girl had time for her own affairs. The academy was far away, so I would have to live in a dorm, and probably all my goals would be there too. And those with a high level of sympathy will probably be the first to come closer, just to talk. She looked at the documents that Skylar gave her. It created some awkwardness inside. And only moments later, she remembered the fork in the plot, whether she had gone through this stage correctly. When will the results of the magical predisposition test be ready? Will she really have to meet the Crown Prince again? If the lady keeps asking canon questions again and again, it will look very suspicious. The information Ariel receives through her phone is no longer enough, as she still knows practically nothing about this world. There was nothing left to do but go to the library to find out more about everything. At this time, the Crown Prince dressed up as if something important was about to happen, and in the hands of one of the maids who served him was an envelope with the test results. As soon as she entered the man's office, Sienna handed over the test results to the Count's daughter. Only the Crown Prince and a few of his close associates could have known about these results, even briefly. Since the result was unusual, Devancia demanded a retake, and today's data will be hidden even from the Countess's family. But the results they got shocked the man, because he did not expect this at all. Her mana level was high, her magical affinity was endless, and she could match any element. She was predisposed as a divine mage. Apparently they had a little tiger cub. After all, in this empire, the only divine magician was His Highness the Crown Prince. In the end, the object's magic was recognized as infinite, but the power of magic always has its own characteristics. And each person had their own specialization in magic, as well as their own gift. This is why the owner of mana must recognize what direction he has talent in and use the appropriate magic. But if you ignore the peculiarities and limits of your power, and also cast spells blindly, they will not work as intended, and mana consumption will only increase. To avoid side effects, mages undergo a predisposition test, which is why Lexius was surprised by Skylar's behavior back then. The magical aptitude test is simple magic is drawn from the fingertips into a device that measures frequency, volume, direction, stability, and recovery power. There are only 5 parameters. They are summed up, a limit is derived, and a rank is assigned. Usually 4 ranks are distinguished. Divine Mage was the highest level. Such people almost never existed. A special mage was only available to the imperial family and a few outstanding aristocrats. A special defensive mage was a level at which magic became extremely difficult. It was generally reserved for knights or mercenaries who had been training in one area for a long time. And the ordinary magician was a basic level, accessible to anyone who had at least some magical power, not excessively powerful, but universal. Now she knew the ranks, but there was no real explanation as to whether this meant that mages were really that important and rare after all. This was the central library. And she still doesn't know the results of her test, not even imagining what rank she'll end up in. Perhaps she should have studied something other than magic. There was very little time left before she entered the university. If she didn't have time to adapt to life here, she would become an outcast of society. While the girl was thinking about this, she almost bumped into Ration, who decided to also come to the library. Luckily, she managed to hide behind one of the bookshelves, not wanting to be noticed. Although she didn't understand at all why she did it, fear took over. After all, they hardly communicated, and it was difficult to meet with him. I didn't want to scare him away so quickly. But even though she was a little scared, she couldn't help but look in his direction. It was immediately clear that she had been noticed long ago. The man could not believe that someone was hiding so stupidly. Even without words, it was clear what he was thinking, although it seemed like he had ignored the girl before. There was no interest, but there was no obvious hostility either, which was already pleasing. Perhaps she should have spoken to him first, but for now, she should have waited until he finished his business, and then Ariel would ask something. She watched carefully as Ration carefully wrote something on paper, and once he had completed most of it, Huxley dared to approach him, which immediately attracted the man's attention. He thought that she would not approach him again. At that moment, only the rustling of tree leaves could be heard. The man just watched what this girl, who had previously hidden from him, wanted to do, but she just calmly sat down at the table opposite him in complete silence. Ariel tried to calm herself before starting the conversation, trying to get into the mood. Although the man didn't care, he was only irritated that she still hadn't left. After all, when he arrived, the lady looked as if she didn't want to see him or even cross paths with him. Finally, the girl gathered the strength and courage to start at least some kind of conversation. And the first thing she decided to ask was whether she could talk to him a little. It sounded too ridiculous, but the answer was short and clear. He was against it. Ariel didn't expect such an answer at all, because she needed to somehow raise her level with him. Moreover, she was only just able to gather the strength to talk to him. And their conversation was too fast and not the best, which only made things confusing. The man was like an uncharted space that could not be approached in any way. He could only advise her to talk only to those with whom she was truly close, but definitely not with him, and before leaving, Ration warned not to follow him. This attempt to start a conversation only seemed to make the situation worse, as his mood now sank to rock bottom. She just tried to speak, and he raised the wall between them even higher. But since there were no sympathy points, there was nowhere for them to fall, but there were no changes either. Still, to be honest, Huxley didn't like this kind of thing, and the goals themselves were each more terrible than the other. Everything only got worse. Apparently, there was no other way to return to her world. She was always facing everything alone. And now she is afraid to walk and learn anything new. The lady just wanted at least someone to help her. It was at that moment that there was a knock on her door, as if someone had heard her words. It was impossible to keep those who came to her waiting with quick movements. The door was opened ajar. Because of it, one could immediately see the silhouette of the person waiting, whom the lady did not expect at all. After all, it was her mother who was interested in her visit to the library. Apparently, they had already reported everything to the Countess, because the answer that everything was fine did not particularly satisfy her. The girl didn't know what they had managed to tell her, thinking about whether to speak or not. But looking at the maid who was standing behind the woman, it became clear that she knew about everything. Because of which she had to tell that in the library she met the son of Archduke Solemn. Should she have established a friendly relationship with him before Ariel went to the academy? The Solemn family was known for its strict neutrality, and any aristocrat would want to have a strong relationship with this family. But, frankly speaking, the Countess did not want to send her daughter to them just for this reason. After all, if the heiress of the Count's family comes personally to Duke Solemn, this will be an extremely clear hint at closer relations. But if the daughter of a Count's house is sent as a friendship broker to meet at the academy, the situation will be different. Not only because it is justified by status, but also because the Emperor's confidant will not irritate the Duke. The problem was different. Only specially invited people could enter Solemn's mansion, and this could be dangerous for her and not end in the best possible outcome. For those who were not personally invited by Solemn, there was a special test to check. The Countess did not know all the details, but it was known that every year someone died from it. Ariel even thought about going there herself, but it would have been too risky. The best way was to go to the palace. A woman could write a letter of recommendation, and if she wanted to establish connections with the upper classes, there was no better place than the palace. After all, their family serves the prince and is recognized as a loyal face of the empire, so getting there won't be difficult. The Countess even heard that she had already undergone a magical test at the palace, which was quite sufficient for the visit. She was only doing what she had to, because the girl was the only heir to the Earl Huxley family. At the same time, important negotiations were taking place in the imperial palace. The crown prince called a general meeting with the king himself on some trivial matter. Although in his mind she was not a trifle, titles, as he said, seemed trivial. But that is precisely why they were so important, although the king never understood their importance. From aristocrats to commoners and slaves, titles have influenced people's lives everywhere. Although they may seem useless, changing titles can completely alter the social order. They finally needed to add something new to settle the titles. Now the only title for the all-powerful emperor was Your Majesty. Below was Devansha and the dukes, who were called Your Highness. Princes and kings of other kingdoms called you Your Grace, and below there are only minor differences, but there are no official titles. The titles of the aristocracy were uniform, namely Lord for men and Mistress for women. The Crown Prince believed that this was not enough, although everyone was satisfied with this arrangement. But the kings of the kingdoms are subject to the empire and bear the title of Your Lordship. Why couldn't they be higher than the ducal houses when this could be changed? After all, according to the law of the empire, it is impossible to belittle the imperial family and the descendants of the founders of the empire. The man did not propose to belittle kings, therefore the descendants of ducal families should be distinguished with a special title. And what about the title? It would have been possible to assign the title of Soka to all three ducal families. It wasn't difficult. All that was needed was to train the servants and start using it in everyday life. Although this will be noticeable even to commoners, the main thing is to use the honorary title on a daily basis. To make the difference immediately noticeable, now for the lower classes, all titles are practically the same. The new title will strengthen social order and maintain a sense of respect for the aristocracy. It would have been worth starting with giving the title of Soka to three ducal families. This way the aristocracy will become more structured, and everyone will be able to feel their status. Thus those in power will be pleased with their titles and will pay attention even to small honors. Unite with equals, bow to superiors, and give vent to emotions to inferiors. By introducing titles, the differences between houses will become clear, leading to a greater understanding of one's power. In this way, the Crown Prince wants to further strengthen discrimination and give people of higher status the opportunity to oppress others below them. By their status alone, this will lead to the fact that the aristocracy of lower status will only revolve within their own circle, while the higher ones enjoy the heights. Of course, the king could not fully agree, but there was a point, and yet he allowed three houses to be given the title of Soka and forbade all the others. On such a good note, the meeting ended and everyone was released to think about it. Devansha decided not to linger in the hall any longer since he had achieved his goal. Now everything will play by his rules, since he has already managed to achieve this. Before he had even managed to walk a little, a sweet girl who had been waiting to meet him ran up to the man. She wondered if he could cope with the oppressive atmosphere. After all, she believed that he had behaved nobly, although she still did not understand the purpose of the innovations. But this was only a minor excuse the Crown Prince needed to at least present something at the academy. And this is great news for the girl, because as the daughter of a duke, she will also be awarded an honorary title. She was beaming with happiness that the prince had taken such good care of her. But every time she looked at Sienna, she always remembered Roxy and began to worry. The girl seemed to sympathize with her because the maid's legs probably fall off from working around the clock. although thanks to the fact that His Highness the Crown Prince condescended to her, thanks to which everything was fine. What the lady greatly disliked was that one who served His Highness could not be allowed to be in need of his mercy, for which the maid asked for forgiveness, but now, on the advice of His Highness, she will work harder. Anasia Charlet, the future bride of the Crown Prince of the Empire, and also the eldest daughter of the ducal family of Charlotte, a noble lady who never hesitated to use the power given to her. Even in front of the Crown Prince himself, she allowed herself to openly ridicule and humiliate him. She just wants to show everyone that the Crown Prince is her fiancé and no one dares to touch her. This had been going on for a very long time, and now the mere mention of her name made Sienna feel disgusted and shudder. After all, she is the Crown Princess, even though she is not formally engaged, and she is just a servant, a person of low status. The Crown Prince would never stand up for a simple maid, so it was hoped that at least someone could break this girl. But Anasia didn't even know that at the moment His Highness was risking himself for the sake of a simple count's daughter. After all, he even broke the laws of the Empire by concealing the results of Lady Ariel Huxley's examination, and Charlie, knowing nothing, temporarily bears the title of Crown Princess. If they met face to face, only God knew what would happen. All that was left was to wait and see. 3 days passed since this not very pleasant meeting, and they went like all the others. But today, in front of the Imperial Palace, there stood a girl who was heading there. After a long time choosing the right date, the Countess finally sent a letter to the palace. After all, if there weren't other high-ranking aristocrats there, Ariel's visit would have lost all meaning. Fortunately, the day when permission for her arrival came coincided with the day of the general meeting of the nobility on the occasion of the war in the south. All the targets were in one place, but in any case, it would be difficult to meet any of them during the meeting. Therefore, it was necessary to go to Ration. Besides, the Countess gave an order that needed to be conveyed to the ducal house of Solem. All that was left was to somehow get to the right floor, but her presence attracted the attention of the servants. Even in the palace, the maids looked only at her as she walked through the corridors. The girl continued to wander through the corridors and stairs for a long time. The closer Ariel got to the room she needed, the fewer and fewer maids there were. Ration held one of the highest positions in the Empire, so why are there no servants visible? Perhaps they all went to the assembly hall. And since no one was there, it was possible to check the location of all the targets. And once she opened the window on her mobile device, the information wasn't the best. After all, now she saw how Skylar moved when he had previously been in the same room. It was as if he was looking for something, or maybe even someone, who was most likely the lady. We had to rule out the worst-case scenario, as he could have simply been heading to the assembly hall. But looking out the window, one could see a greater number of noble ladies and servants who were on the street. It was necessary to urgently hurry to the reception room, where the Archduke was now. Although after such a brazen decision Ration might have disliked the girl, it was worth trying. After all, it was absolutely impossible to meet with Skylar now, just to avoid changing levels with him. And only after some more time, the Countess's daughter reached the right door. It was scary to open the door, because there was a man behind it, but it had to be done. But as soon as the girl wanted to open it herself, someone got ahead of her and opened it from the other side. Ration was now standing in the passage, which only frightened her, because she didn't want to ruin her relationship with him. She tried to say that she brought news to the Duke of Solem from the Countess. But the atmosphere around him was stifling and frightening because he almost drove her away. Did he really know that Ariel would come and went out on purpose to drive her away? Still, the man was very difficult, although she herself was looking for a meeting, but only for the sake of negotiations. But this hatred towards her, it turns out, is much more difficult to be its object than she thought. He had to pull himself together because Countess Huxley wanted their family to share the noble aspirations of the Dukes of Solem for the neutrality of the Empire. The Countess, following the will of the Duke of Solesmes, undertakes on behalf of her family to always abstain from voting on any issues, precisely to those that the ducal family of Solem does not want to give way to. In the Imperial Assembly, where the fate of the Empire is decided by a majority vote, the right to vote is the aristocrat's most powerful weapon. Even the imperial family could not completely ignore the power of the houses. In fact, it was the strongest card the Count's family could play against the Dukes. And Countess Huxley was ready to transfer more than half of this power to the Dukes of Solem. In exchange for this, she wanted an invitation from their family. The price of this deal was a prosperous connection between the families. Even if the only reward for such large concessions was just an invitation, the Countess considered it no loss, because it was the only way to establish contact with the closed and neutral Solemns. But how will she now prove the seriousness of her intentions, since the Solemns do not accept abstract guarantees? That is why the lady brought the Huxley family seal as proof. This was quite enough, but if their agreement was broken, only death would await the Countess. Ariel understood this perfectly well, but these words sounded too frightening. Even if only for a moment after that, his gaze became more friendly than ever. It was worth stopping this eye contact, because it was still necessary to give out a reward for such difficult work. But only for the first and last time, this award will go to the girl so easily. At that moment, someone's voices were heard saying that they had been in the Duke's room for too long. Apparently, someone noticed them, which wasn't the best news. Fortunately, Raishin quickly brought what the lady had come to him for. By this time, when the girl finally got what she wanted, Skylar arrived. But he didn't expect at all that the man would come out just to meet him. As it turned out, he went out because he heard loud sounds, guessing that he was looking for someone. The prince came to ask if Raishin had seen Lady Huxley, the girl he had brought with him that time. It all happened because the servants said they had noticed someone with similar features in the palace. Luckily, the man told him that it was his maid whom he had called here. Therefore, he did not see any Lady Huxley, which was not the best news for the prince. There was no lady in the reception hall either. He must have taken a wrong turn, although that was even for the better. Skylar didn't know what she might say when they met this time, and he was completely unprepared for it. And yet, if the man saw her, he asked to let her know, but then changed his mind, asking her to forget. It was sad to see the prince in such a mood, because they had just hidden the truth from him. But now that His Highness had gone far enough, the girl could finally go out. It was not nice to deceive the prince in this way, but it was impossible to meet with them. As soon as Ariel was informed about leaving, it was possible to leave calmly, although she would be in trouble if the prince found out about her affairs with the Duke of Salem. Besides, he had his own opinion about the girl, although she did not understand at all what he was talking about. Even though everything was simple, the prince was determined to make Huxley his own property. The lady still didn't understand anything. Of course, Raishin could happily tell her about it. But now the man does not owe her anything, because he has already concluded a deal between the Duke of Salem and Count Huxley as a representative. He pulled away again. Apparently the man really didn't want to have anything to do with her. But she needed to establish contact with Raishin by any means possible, which was too problematic. It was worth at least thanking him, and next time she will try to offer something else. And now there is something that could interest young Mr. Salem even more. Now the girl would go, but she wanted him to remember that she was sincerely grateful for today. These were the last words with which the girl left, but they were the ones that touched Raishin. After all, the man did not expect at all that a lady like her would say such words, leaving him completely alone to ponder what had just happened. Luckily, Ariel made it back to the reception room without any difficulty, but Skylar was still busy. The meeting was still ongoing. It was held right in the palace, so the level of sympathy is unlikely to change. Even if she met the prince, she began to doubt his actions more and more. Therefore, the girl would prefer to avoid meetings if there is such an opportunity as now. Moreover, the lady came not only to meet with Raishin, but also for the test results. But as soon as she came to inquire about it, she was again told that there were problems with the verification, so the test was re-examined. They couldn't tell the reason, because the maid didn't have access to this information. Having promised to send the results as soon as the recheck was completed, she could only apologize for the inconvenience and ask them to wait a little. But how much longer can it take to recheck the results when so much time has already passed? Luckily, everything would be ready in a few days, which was not so long. In that case, Ariel no longer had a reason to stay in the palace. All that was left was to leave the gift on the table and return, because if he waited a little longer, he might meet one of the targets. Which is exactly what would have happened, because after some time, the meeting was over. And Devancia found a gift left by Huxley as a token of gratitude for allowing the lady to visit her. But the crown prince was interested in where she was, but she left the palace immediately after learning about the re-inspection. But it was worth looking at the gift Ariel left for him while he was busy. Inside the red velvet box lay a small white diamond. Ariel left about an hour ago, and when she heard how long the wait would be, she apologized, thinking he was too busy. This information did not bother the man at all. He was only interested in whether she had seen anyone at that time. According to the report, she remained in the waiting room the entire time and then went out for a short walk. Upon returning and hearing the news, Lady Huxley left almost immediately, and during this time she did not meet anyone. And yet, Devantia thought that she wanted to meet him, but it seemed that she didn't come for that reason at all. From now on, the maid will ensure that the lady does not neglect her duties in the palace. The girl didn't need to try so hard, because the crown prince would take care of that himself. After all, very soon they would be able to meet again at the academy. All they had to do was wait. The man had some not-so-good thoughts on his mind, which only frightened the servant. At the same time, Schuyler was still unable to meet Lady Huxley, whom he was so desperately looking for. 3 weeks passed from that moment, during which the girl managed to prepare. After all, the Royal College was 3 kilometers to the west, which was far away. Moreover, it is there that she will be able to meet with her targets frequently, and this is the place that she should prioritize above all else. As we approached the desired location, there were more and more guards. But besides this, a large number of people were visible who were holding letters in their hands. As the lady approached the crowd, she mentally apologized to her mother because she could not be a serious student. The line to get into the academy moved quickly, so she soon became next. And as soon as she was called, the man who was checking the documents asked for her papers. Ariel quickly took out the envelope she had been carrying with her all this time. The entire verification procedure proceeded as usual, a boring document check. But what he saw in this letter was completely unusual, which made him shudder. He didn't understand why the lady came this way, apologizing for not recognizing her. The girl had already begun to think that there were some problems with her documents. What was wrong was that she didn't need to use deference anymore. Huxley didn't know that ever since she stopped meeting ordinary people, they had become so mean to those who belonged to the royal family. All these angry glances towards the girl frightened her. She wanted to say something but couldn't. After all, as soon as she wanted to say something, everyone around began to tremble with fear. Now Ariel understood her situation. Because of the prince's letter of recommendation, everyone was afraid of her. But the rumor that someone so influential had gone like ordinary people spread among the servants. Luckily, a car was ready within a few minutes, and she immediately went to the hostel in it. The view outside the window was stunning. The building was large and impressive. In size, it was about the same as the Count's residence, and she could even move around the academy grounds by car. The trip was amazing, but after some time, she arrived at the first dormitory building. Finally, she could go out in peace without so many eyes looking at Ariel. The dormitory itself looked no worse than the academy, which was captivating to look at. All this time, the maid was waiting for the girl, who wanted to take her to her room. The road to the required room was not the shortest, but even the entrance to it looked majestic. By opening the right door just a little, one could see a huge room, in which Canon had been waiting for her for some time, trying to support her mistress. Even commoners could get into the academy if they passed a difficult entrance test. That was how they were recognized. Students at the academy are treated differently depending on their rank, and Ariel was considered one of the most important people among them. Canon even heard that among the nobles, special VIP seats are only given to the 3 dukes of the empire. The first building of the dormitory is also intended only for those who have the highest rank. And today there will be an important announcement at the entrance ceremony, so all students will be present there. The lady also had to go as a transfer student. She had to go to the main auditorium at 10 o'clock in her school uniform. There was a knight there who would accompany her, so Ariel could go there by car. It was now 9 o'clock, the perfect time to get ready. Black was the usual school uniform. White clothing is for VIPs, and only those who live in the first dormitory can wear it. This is necessary to distinguish especially important persons. She could wear whatever she wanted. Huxley didn't want to attend the academy and attract as much attention as before. It would definitely make it harder for her to aim. Wouldn't it be a problem if she wore a regular uniform, since other students might be criticized for disrespect if they behaved freely with her? If she wears a regular uniform, she will be treated the same as everyone else. Even though a lady may have a privilege, no one will be punished for treating her like other nobles. So Ariel could make friends like a normal person, which was great. After all, at the entrance ceremony the girls stood with everyone else in a black uniform, but next to them stood those who were dressed in snow-white clothes with their heads held high. The class system has been taken to the extreme. If you weren't a nobleman, you couldn't even stand in line with them. Even the nobles were divided into classes in this way at the academy. The atmosphere in the room was oppressive. Everyone was waiting for further action. Suddenly, someone nearby asked the girl if she was a returning student. This was not the case, since it was only her first day here and she was a transfer student. The lady was curious who had recommended her since she was a transfer student, and as soon as she wanted to say so, she was again unable to. After all, I saw a familiar figure approaching all the students. Ariel didn't expect to see him at the entrance ceremony. It was His Majesty the Crown Prince who would make the announcement, as new laws concerning etiquette were passed during the meeting. Devansha seemed to be waiting for this moment, because for this event he had spoken with the king. The academy was the first place where the law was passed, and the corresponding regulation would be announced and put into effect in advance. From now on, in the academy, the descendants of the dukes of the empire, such as the duchies of Solam, Maha, and Chapelle, will be given the title of Soha. Persons below the rank of the 3 ducal houses, or all students gathered here, must use honorifics to address them without exception. It's extremely easy and understandable, so there's no need to worry, and you should do yourself a favor and pay more attention to your manners. In addition to the new rules, the man wanted to introduce 3 transfer students. They were supposed to be presented during the inauguration ceremony. Now that the whole school had gathered after a long break, it was the perfect time to introduce them. The Crown Prince hoped that everyone would welcome them warmly, asking all 3 to come to him. At that moment, the girl who had started the conversation with her earlier realized that Ariel was one of them. But besides her, there were 2 more girls, one in a black uniform and the other in a white one. It was impossible to keep everyone waiting, since only Huxley remained, who had not yet come out. The first girl was Anasia Charles, a beautiful and sweet girl in a snow-white uniform. The second was Blanche Mayer, an elegant lady with white hair, her black uniform highlighting her beauty. And the third was Ariel Huxley, who was uncomfortable standing in front of everyone. These ladies were new students transferred to the academy. They had good letters of recommendation. All students had to raise their heads to greet the transfer students. Transfer students should also welcome those who will become their allies in the future. What was Devansha thinking? Lower-ranking students now don't dare approach her. Especially when they find out about her connections to the royal family, no one was supposed to know about this. Luckily, at this point everything ended and all the students were free. At this rate, Ariel had no idea if she would be able to make friends, since she didn't even have anyone to talk to. Thoughts about this troubled the girl throughout the entire journey as she walked to her room. Suddenly someone called out to her from behind, which was surprising in such a place. She didn't understand who it could be, because she didn't know anyone at the academy except the royal family. That very person turned out to be Lady Anasia, who had been following her all this time. Although she had never heard of this girl's last name, she was already wearing a white uniform. This could only mean one thing: she was definitely one of the 3 ducal families. The servant standing nearby did not tolerate such disrespect towards Lady Charla, calling Hakuri once again. But he shouldn't have addressed her like that, and shown arrogance towards someone who had received a recommendation from His Highness the Crown Prince. In the future, he should not repeat this mistake, which was clear from the first word. Although this girl looked sweet and innocent, she was anything but that inside. But the girl did not come to her for the sake of meaningless conversations. She asked her to come to her. Only then did Ariel understand everything that was happening, greeting Lady Charlie. The girl looked at the Countess's daughter intently, as if trying to get a better look at her. Noting that she was so beautiful that His Highness the Crown Prince had certainly often paid attention to her. On the one hand, she was kind, but the way she talked to the servants, perhaps she was as perceptive as the rest of the nobles. Although the lady spoke of wanting to make friends, perhaps it will work out with her. After only a little thought, Charlie asked to be called Your Highness instead of Lady, which should have been a great honor for her. Huxley just wanted to be friends with her, but she realized that it wouldn't be the best idea. But there was nothing left to do but obey her and go to Devansha, who was waiting for them in the car. The situation was becoming more and more unclear, because why had Lady Anasia brought her to this place? Ariel was afraid to come closer to the man, because it was unclear why they were here. This might be another one of Devancia's plans to irritate Skylar, but even Charlie herself did not understand why it was necessary to take the girl to this place. His Highness watched their arrival as if displeased with the lady's indignation. Catching his gaze on herself, Ariel felt increasingly uncomfortable. The servant standing next to the girls offered to escort her ladyship to the car, although she made it clear that she should be addressed as Your Highness the Crown Princess. But it was the man who ordered him to call the lady that, because today there was a new decree that had to be followed. Lady Charlotte slowly realized that she had even forgotten about this, although that was definitely not the reason. Her ladyship was already in the car, but Ariel had no intention of getting into the car so quickly. But they were in a hurry, so she had to sit down next to them quickly. After all, sometimes it was useful to take a little walk, and there was one place where they could go together. With these words, the Count's daughter got into the car, although she didn't want to, but it was impossible to irritate Devancia more. Besides this, the girl called herself the Crown Princess. If she corrected the servant, it means she must have a public relationship. Was Lady Charlotte really in an official relationship with the Crown Prince? She didn't even think that one of her targets was engaged, which only made things worse. Moreover, Anasia's hands were shaking, as if she was unhappy with the fact that the girl was sitting next to her. But her hands quickly stopped shaking, as if she had come to terms with it, turning into exactly the same sweet girl as before, as if none of this had happened. Charlene was apparently so obsessed with the position of Crown Princess that she could not accept the new rules. For now, it was worth refraining from unnecessary conversations that could offend anyone. After some time, they finally arrived at their destination. Although the man was late, the voice that said so was eerily familiar to Ariel. It was Lexus who was scolding Devancia, asking him not to go to the auditorium. It wasn't difficult. The Crown Prince could have simply sent his assistant there. They didn't yet know that the man wanted to bring someone. Everyone immediately thought that it was his fiancée. But they did not expect at all that he would bring the Count's daughter Ariel to their meeting place. As soon as Raishan, who was sitting on a chair and looking into the distance, heard her name, his face changed slightly. The girl herself did not know that she would come to such a place, but she still greeted Mr. Krishand and Solam. Even though the girls had arrived, Devancia was wondering where Skylar was now. As it turned out, he came to see them for a minute and then left. Apparently he had some business to attend to. The red-haired man didn't know where the prince had gone, but the man assumed that he had gone to meet someone. But no one knew who he might be meeting at such a time, except Ariel, because apparently Skylar went straight after her. As soon as he discovers that the girl is nowhere to be found, he will definitely be upset. Now was not the time for that. They had a lot of guests, so they could sit down more comfortably. The prince would be here soon. They both knew he should have been in the first dorm by now for Ariel's sake. But the royal family had brought her here, so the girl couldn't keep them waiting. We had to find a place in this tent so as not to disturb anyone, which was problematic. Having noticed one of the places that was not too close to the others and would not disturb anyone, the lady immediately moved towards it. Everyone was surprised that she chose a chair that stood all alone in this tent. The men who observed this behavior had no idea what was going on in her mind. But they didn't say anything, letting it go in one eye and resigning themselves to it. As soon as everyone had taken their seats, the conversation began about the South, for which the Crown Prince thanked Lexus. Although he didn't do it for him, because the man wasn't even strong in mathematics, so he doesn't even know what's best for him. Still, Devancia was grateful that he had to give the gift, but he was too helpless. All these conversations did not bother Huxley. She did not understand why she was here. They looked like friends, but did not look like close people at all. It was difficult to intervene, since this was a political conversation, and she felt that she should not disturb them. Perhaps someone forced them to get ready from the first day of admission, which was strange. While the girl was thinking about this, she saw Skylar finally come to them. The man was clearly tired from such a pointless trip to the first dormitory. After all, he couldn't find what he was looking for there, even though he didn't know that the lady was already in the tent. The Count's daughter was just about to call him when she immediately remembered that she was not alone. By this point, everyone present, who had been so actively engaged in conversation, suddenly fell silent, turning their attention to the prince. But as soon as the guy entered the tent, he immediately began to get indignant at the girl for doing something here. The Count's daughter certainly didn't expect that the first thing they would do would be to scold her, although it was clear from Skylar's face that he was tired from his trip and was not in a good mood. To stop this performance from continuing any further, Devancia finally said that it was he who had brought her here. It was a little surprising for the guy because he didn't expect such an answer at all. Skylar seemed to be burning the Crown Prince with his gaze. All his anger was directed at him. And they couldn't leave now, because difficulties might arise later. He should first learn to speak. The girl didn't understand at all what to do, because interfering could make the situation worse. But she couldn't watch this humiliation for long, so she grabbed the prince by the arm and offered to talk. Devancia hadn't expected this at all, as it was sheer impudence. Anasia thought that the prince was quite narrow-minded, just like the countess. It would have been better if she hadn't said those words, because the crown prince was already angry at Ariel's behavior. Just from his look, one could tell that it was better not to say anything unnecessary now. The man's behavior frightened Lady Charlotte so much that her hands began to tremble again. At the same time, Skylar and Lady Huxley had already moved quite a decent distance away from the tent. The whole way they walked, the girl couldn't stop thinking that a month had already passed since their last meeting. From the moment it became dangerous to stay with the Crown Prince, but for now, it was worth dragging out this conversation. They had already moved far enough that the tent was no longer visible. It would have been possible to start a conversation about the reason why the girl was here. She received the call after the entrance ceremony was over, and she didn't dare refuse because he wanted a ride. What kind of businesslike manner is this? Ariel could have at least greeted him first. In that case, the lady decided to do it now, since she hadn't seen him for almost a month. Their conversation was not going well at all, which made them feel awkward and sad. But it was all because Skylar told him not to touch him, so he regrets his rash act. Huxley should have forgotten about it a long time ago, because he thought she was just stubborn. Now the guy understood why she behaved so distantly towards him. And maybe she had taken up too much of his precious time. They should go back. This conversation was already enough, because now she was still afraid to change the level of the relationship. Just as Ariel was about to go back to the tent, the guy started to get indignant again. He didn't understand why the girl didn't miss him, since she decided to take him away, despite her situation. The prince was serious. Their gaze was fixed on each other, which was very embarrassing. What should she do now? How could his level of favor change so much? There were too many questions. After all, they weren't in a relationship where they missed each other just because they were apart for a month. She was always grateful to him for his help in translation, and Skylar always treated her well. But that wasn't what he wanted to hear. His feelings for her were too strong compared to Ariel. His feelings were the most transparent of the targets, so she wondered if his favor was growing too quickly. That's why she pushed him away. There were still 3 points of advantage left, so there was no need to put too much pressure on him by suggesting to take a little more walk. There were still plenty of surprises for Skylar, if only not to lower the level with him. As the couple continued walking through the small clearing, Ariel decided to ask how he was doing. Everything was fine. Besides, she was glad that the prince did not catch a cold. This question made them feel a little embarrassed, but fortunately the tension between them disappeared. During the entire time they were apart, the count's daughter spent time in the county and read a lot. She felt as if her knowledge was lacking at the academy, and that she was lagging far behind her classmates. If he had studied more by reading literature, Skylar understood her feelings perfectly. After all, he also felt like he wasn't up to par with his classmates. But more than that, the girl wanted to say something as soon as she saw him. The first thing the lady wanted to do when she saw him was introduce herself. What was wrong? She understood what he was talking about. Huxley at that moment wanted to call him by name. It was difficult to notice from his distance that she wanted to say something apparently. The prince had keen eyes. Skylar understood perfectly well that she wanted to call him by name, which she denied until the very end. Then, his name almost slipped out of her mouth while she was thinking about her own. Besides, addressing the prince by his first name at the academy would attract a lot of unnecessary attention. This vehement denial was starting to get tiresome, because he knew perfectly well that everything was different. He grabbed the girl by the hand, asking her not to think about anything else, because if she wanted, she could calmly call him that. As soon as these words were spoken, they came for them, interrupting such an important conversation. It was a man who walked towards them without even looking at his feet, which caused him to step on branches. Devancia asked the guy to come back if they were already finished talking. They have been gone too long, and the space they worked so hard to prepare will be wasted. The Crown Prince's insistence on returning put a lot of pressure on the couple, even though they didn't finish their conversation. But it was impossible to refuse him in such a situation, even though I didn't want to agree. There was nothing left to do but resign ourselves and go, because they had really been absent for a long time. Just as they started walking towards the tent, a man blocked Ariel's path. Skylar could move forward for now, but right now he had his own conversation with the girl. He just needed to talk to her about something, so there was no point in starting a fight at a time like this. It sounded like a real threat, which was what really irritated the prince. Remembering how the last time the girl asked to return to the room during their next quarrel, at that moment she didn't want to be near them, deeply apologizing for it. And this situation was similar to the one that had happened months earlier. Now he felt as if he was powerless. Ariel couldn't do anything about the Crown Prince's insistence on talking, and the conversation won't be the most pleasant, because until now he hadn't paid attention to it. But from now on, she had to stop behaving like this, even though this was an academy. Refusing the Crown Prince of the Empire was an unwise choice for the girl. Besides, the man really didn't like it when the Count's daughter rejected him. She did this not only with words, but also with her actions. Even the expression on her face spoke of it. By accepting any offer, if things turn out this way, her strategy will be too disadvantageous. So she had to pull herself together, because from now on she would be more careful. After this conversation, they returned to the tent, where the meal and tea drinking became especially dull. Ariel was only present because the Crown Prince brought her, although in reality he forced her. She wasn't enjoying the activity at all, so she was just trying to clear the air. In the end, she remained quietly on the sidelines, unable to find an opportunity to join the conversation. Even after the reception ended, the girl was the last to leave. Because of her status, at least she still had the strength to return home, which had already been difficult. During the first week of the semester, freshmen and transfer students had no classes. This time was given to help them get used to the academy. During this period, students were required to create their schedules and become familiar with the equipment. Even after their schedules were created, they were given about a month to fully adapt. As a result, full-fledged classes only began in the 5th week after the introductory session, perhaps because this is an imperial academy. There are more than 100 magic courses alone, but Huxley still does not know the results of magical abilities. Without knowing your abilities, attending anything beyond lectures on the basics of magic would simply be a waste of time. Luckily, Canon wanted to hand it to her as soon as they arrived, but she felt like the lady was busy, so she hands it over now. These were the results. Ariel had special defensive magic, which was a level higher than normal. Out of all 4 ranks, it was still the 3rd. But considering that she had transferred here under the patronage of the prince, it was indeed a little discouraging. All key figures must be of high rank, and now she can finally plan her schedule. At the moment, adaptation has to be her priority, so it was worth making sure that it didn't become tiring, which was quite difficult. After all, even the next day she was unable to make a good schedule on her own. They should at least provide advice on magic that doesn't have to do with strategy, and after much thought, the Count's daughter remembered that she could find help from someone. Without further ado, Ariel immediately headed to the library where Lexus was sitting. After all, it was to him that the girl decided to turn for help, as he advised her to do on the first day. The man sat wearing glasses, carefully turning the pages of a book. Sensing someone's presence, his hand slowly stopped on one of the pages. But when the girl addressed him formally, she didn't even raise her head to look at her. It was only when Huxley called him Senior Lexus that he finally turned his attention to her. It was embarrassing to call the Duke so boldly at the academy, even though there was no one else there besides them. She sat down opposite Lexus, surprised that he wore glasses, but he put them on just like that. They probably don't suit him that well, which is exactly what happened. But why did she come to him? He got down to business too quickly, which confused the lady a little. He had to answer honestly that Huxley had come to him to draw up her schedule, because it turned out to be more difficult than she thought. The lady tried to fill it out as best she could, so she asked to check it. As it turned out, Ariel only decided on a few easy ones, apparently deciding to laze around. What was wrong was that at first she completely filled her schedule, but she doesn't think that a large number of classes will really help. And to be honest, the girl didn't even know which of them would be more useful. Now that she thinks about it, she realizes that she didn't even know the basics of witchcraft that were so important here. Having heard all the complaints about his schedule, Lexus realized that absolutely everything had to be redone. and in just a few minutes the new class schedule was ready. But when she looked, she discovered that the man had added a bunch of advanced courses for her. And 2 of them were practical classes, and he won't be able to keep up, especially in practical classes. It was all because Ariel wouldn't achieve anything by simply listening to theory. Magic was meant to be used, not just studied. Which was true, but she didn't plan to study it now, since she hadn't come to study. Luckily, Lexus volunteered to help her himself, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday at 9 o'clock. Only at this time could he help her, thanks to which Huxley has a reason to get to know him better. Now she would do everything in her power, but since today was Tuesday, she could only come to him tomorrow. As soon as the girl wanted to leave, the man asked her to drop the honorary titles. After all, he considered it a waste of time, which was a little unusual to hear from someone like him. But nothing could be done about it, so I had to accept it and call him by his name now. And just from one such appeal to him, the man seemed to glow with happiness. This behavior made Huxley wonder for a moment if it was too rude to him. Because she started apologizing, she could continue to use formalities, which was worth forgetting, and just being cheeky, which is not bad. So Lexus really did think it was impudent, but he allowed her to address him that way. In that case, since everything had been discussed, in that case there was no point in delaying any longer. Moreover, they will still be able to see each other tomorrow. With these words, the girl finally took her leave. The man watched Ariel leave intently, but after she left, his mood instantly changed. But the Count's daughter was beaming with happiness as soon as she left the library because everything had turned out much easier than she thought. It was an unexpected coincidence to meet Lex, because now she finally had a good relationship with him. Things could have been much simpler, but as soon as the lady had gone far enough, her next target was nearby. It was Skylar sitting on the couch as if he had been waiting for someone all this time. It was unexpected to meet a guy in such a place, which made her face look like she had seen a ghost. Although she simply didn't expect to see him, she asked if he had slept well the night before. If he answers no, would the girl console him? Although the prince tried to sound more friendly, he was not succeeding at all. So Ariel quietly sat down on the chair that stood nearby without even saying another word. Did she have to feel so awkward every time they met? Although the lady was not very expressive, she was glad to see Skylar. This softened the prince, albeit briefly, because after just a couple of seconds, he began to be indignant again. After all, he could tell just by her appearance that the girl was not happy to see him. This not-so-great start to the conversation created an awkward pause between them. It was impossible to just sit in silence, because the atmosphere was becoming more and more oppressive. That's why the Count's daughter was the first to start a conversation about how she had never seen him smile before. Did the girl really want him to smile? It was a little unnatural for him. But why did he continue to ask her opinion, as if he shouldn't care what the Count's daughter thinks? Last time they left everything vague, so now the lady will try to get a little closer today. Therefore, she would like to see with all her heart how His Highness smiles. The man never expected to hear such frank words from the girl, which made his face turn like a tomato from the paint. Although Skylar didn't mind, since smiling was something he could control, his face betrayed his embarrassment. Even though he said it wouldn't be that difficult, the prince couldn't make it that easy. And even after minutes of such silence, he still couldn't smile, as if it was really difficult for him. Having received no result, he promised that he would smile next time. With these words, the prince immediately jumped up from his seat, without answering the question of when the next time would be. If it was so difficult, then you could have refused right now. Ariel was probably already starting to get used to this kind of behavior. In any case, there were more important things to do. The girl should be at the library.